Our story kicks off in what's left of a building. Basically a fixer-upper's worst nightmare. With people running around like they're late for a Black Friday sale. They're being pursued by a particularly clingy group of zombies. And someone's yelling to shut the door. But just as they get to it, the zombies arrive. Clearly not ones to take a hint. A wave of oh crap washes over the group as they try to figure out how to get rid of these uninvited guests. With no bouncer in sight, they realize they'll have to handle this themselves and brace for a fight. The zombies are absolutely legion. And some are built like linebackers. Which really doesn't help the mood. In a moment of inspired desperation, the team hefts a giant pillar and shoves it toward the moaning mob. One of the crew, playing peekaboo through a hole in the pillar, lobs a little goodbye present at the incoming horde. A massive explosion goes off. And between heavy breaths, one of them pants out. Did we get those freeloading brain munchers just then? Another teammate points and says, "Hey, look, a safety house." And suddenly, a system notification pops up. 2 minutes remaining until the zone closes. A tiny spark of hope, like a match in a hurricane, flickered in the distance. A safety house had materialized. For Ishij Shina. This meant the ridiculously long date from heck was almost over. The finish line was in sight. He took a deep breath, introducing himself with a newfound sense of purpose. "I'm Ishij Shina, a guy who's been desperately clinging to life for the last 5 years, in a world that seriously needs to sort out its issues. It all started with the Great Catastrophe, a sudden disaster that instantly canceled humanity's brunch plans. From that day forward, the world was a total mess. These special zones started popping up randomly all over, each with its own unique flavor of difficulty. Inside, endless waves of zombies would attack with absolutely zero chill. For the humans trapped inside, there was only one way to survive: clear the mission, find the safety house, and get the heck out. Those who made it got a sweet stat boost and some nifty survival gear. But if you missed the deadline for the safety house, well, you faced a grim fate, becoming a zombie yourself. In just 6 months, 80% of humanity had already checked out. The world had become a real-life Monday morning. But in these awful zones, survivors got a major glow-up. All that running and fighting forced them to get stronger. From all that pain came some serious gains. A ton of absolute legends were born from the chaos, all chasing one thing: getting stronger to earn even better rewards. And, ultimately, to achieve the Grand Slam by clearing all 100 levels of the special zones. And today, for the very first time, a level 100 zone had appeared. Ishij stood before it. At level 100, about to clear the final stage, he'd made it this far with his 5 most trusted and ridiculously good-looking companions. Just a little further, and this whole nightmare would be over. If they could just get to that safety house, then Ishij Shina would be the first person to ever hit the Grand Slam. He'd survived more near-death experiences than he could count to get here. Just a little bit more. With a fire in their eyes, the team made a mad dash for the safety house. But just before they got there, the universe threw them a nasty curveball. Peeking out of the safety house window was a monstrous zombie. My jaw dropped. This wasn't just your average garden variety undead. This thing was on a whole other level of terrifying. As it lumbered closer, he frantically asked his team if everyone was all right. One of his teammates gasped. "You've got to be kidding me. The safety house has a bouncer." Ishij's heart started doing the cha-cha. This new enemy was in a completely different league from anything they'd ever fought. But hey, it was the final obstacle. Getting past this big guy was our only ticket to the VIP lounge. And man, the aura coming off him was less menacing and more missed a shower for a week. Just looking at him was a total vibe killer. That's when Brenda, our resident Shimmer, did a quick inventory of our plus E9 persuasion tools. We were down to 5 energy drinks and a single flask of questionable liquid courage. That was it. She made a gutsy call. She was going to distract the bouncer with her charm. The rest of us would chug our energy drinks to sprint past. And then, With one heroic swig from the flask, she would deliver the final, charming blow. There was no room for error. He quickly knocked back the drink. But the second the liquid hit his tongue, he knew something tasted funky. He charged forward to engage the bouncer. But whoa, something was off. His body felt like it was made of jelly. And his confidence just evaporated. Then it hit him like a rogue disco ball. They hadn't given him a confidence booster. They'd given him a total Buzzkill Potion. As he wobbled, feeling utterly played, one of his teammates shot him a smug little smirk. It was their moment, without missing a beat. The other 5 members slammed their fancy, imported energy drinks, their eyes burning with a lust for free appetizers, with a wobbly Ichigo left in their dust. They made a mad dash for the velvet rope. The clock was officially ticking on the bouncer's patience. 20 seconds on the clock. Ichigo was still battling the mountain of a man, his voice cracking with disbelief as he called out, asking why they'd given him the decaf version of courage. Was it some kind of prank? But the truth was about to hit harder than any bouncer. One of his teammates, already sprinting towards the good life, shouted back that it was 100% intentional. They had packed that warm pickle juice special just for him. Getting in without a distraction would have been impossible, but with free drinks so close, they just needed a fall guy to keep the big guy busy. As long as Ichigo stalled the gatekeeper, they could make a clean getaway. The betrayal stung. The team even heckled him, saying that if Ichigo got tossed out, it just meant their bar tab would be smaller. He sarcastically thanked Ichigo for being their human shield and declared himself the king of the club, staggering under the weight of his wounded pride. Ichigo muttered every curse word he knew, and then invented a few new ones. He couldn't even muster the energy to look cool. It finally sank in. Their plan was to ditch him from the very beginning. As they vanished behind the velvet rope, one of them sneered that he'd tell everyone Ichigo had bravely sacrificed his night for his friends. He said he couldn't wait to see Ichigo again after he'd turned into one of the sad saps outside, just so he could buy him a pity shot and laugh about it. Betrayed and cornered. Ichigo let out a pathetic scream, calling them the worst friends ever. But the group was already gone. Vanished into the promised land. They were in the VIP lounge. Left behind. Ichigo faced the monster alone. His will to party was officially crushed. The bouncer's giant hand clamped down on his shoulder like a vice. Ichigo crumpled to the floor, the pain of ultimate rejection washing over him. Was this really how his night ended? Getting booted before he even got in. He hated it. A cold, monotone voice echoed in his mind. Fun time's over, pal. Ejection sequence in progress. Ichigo's head swam. He'd pre-gamed so hard. Survived rush hour traffic, only to end up as one of the zombies on the wrong side of the rope. The transformation into a total party foul was underway. He could feel the shame spreading through his veins. Was this it? Should he just go home and binge-watch sad movies? He thought of their laughter. The injustice of it all. His petty little soul refused to give up. Even if he became an outcast, he would have his glorious, petty revenge. And with that, Ichigo's world went dark. He awoke. Stark, naked, and submerged in some very questionable-looking water. A wave of confusion hit him. Where was he? Had the transformation into a complete loser finished? Was he a full-blown party zombie now? Or was this just the hangover to end all hangovers? His fists clenched. Well, if this was his grand finale, he was going out with a bang. Not a whimper. His life's resume had one entry: professional loser. But it was time for a career change. Suddenly, the whole world decided to reboot. He blinked his eyes open and found himself on a painfully familiar rooftop. A classic high school drama was unfolding. The resident jerk who used to make his life a nightmare was giving another kid a noogie from hell. The demand was for a protection fee of 50,000 yen. Seriously. Did this guy think he was in the mafia? The poor kid, trembling like a chihuahua, insisted his wallet was empty. But the bully just suggested a 5-finger discount from somewhere else. If the cash didn't appear by sunset, the percussion therapy sessions would become a daily special. This felt way too vivid to be just a bad dream. Aiju knew this place all too well. It was the VIP lounge for his daily beatdowns. Was this some kind of twisted, dying dream? The aches all over his body screamed. Nope. This is live and in high def. Pal, the bully, getting bored, turned his attention back to the terrified kid. He snarled, asking what the plan was. Without a moment's hesitation, the kid folded like cheap lawn chair and threw Ishij right under the bus. He squealed that the part-time job money was in his bag. The bully actually chuckled, impressed by how fast he sold out his buddy, with a grin that could curdle milk. He turned to Ishij and held out his hand. Ichijo's brain was buffering, and then it hit him with crystal clarity. He was back. Back before the world went completely sideways. The rooftop. The school. The questionable fashion choices. It was all here, without even flinching. Chijo stared the bully down and asked, "Hey, what's today's date?" Annoyed, the bully snapped, "Who do you think you're talking to?" and lunged for the bag. But before his fingers could even graze the fabric, Ishij made his move. A perfect punch connected with the bully's jaw, sending him flying like a cartoon character. A little blood trickled from his nose as the entire rooftop audience froze in a real-life mannequin challenge. Did Ishij just deck Manhwa, the same guy who used to torment him for fun? No way this was happening. He glared down at the bully on the ground and repeated, his voice dangerously quiet, "I asked you a question." He took a deep breath, his eyes practically smoldering. Ichijo looked around at the shocked faces. He'd basically downloaded superpowers from his future self. Yeah. The loser subscription had officially been cancelled. So, this was Manhwa, a third-year student whose major seemed to be advanced bullying with a minor in extortion. His business model was simple: collect bodyguard fees from kids who needed protection from, well, Kim. He even had some shady Yakuza wannabe friends. The teachers were pros at looking the other way. Meanwhile, Ishii, who'd lost his parents, was hustling at part-time jobs just to make ends meet. This basically put a giant kick-me sign on his back. Manhwa would bark at him to pay up. Acting like a big-shot CEO of a shakedown empire, he was demanding the fee again, even though Ichigo had paid him just 2 days ago. But logic was a foreign language to Manhwa. Talking back only made the beatings worse. So, everyone just watched from the sidelines, secretly glad Acho was the one taking the heat. Manhwa taunted him, shoving him for a reaction. But this time, something was different. This time, Ichigo didn't even flinch. He just gave him a firm look back. Manhwa's face went from smug to furious in record time. Then came the punch that sent shockwaves across the rooftop. The spectators started whispering in total disbelief. Ichijo actually hit Manhwa scrambling to his feet. Manhwa ordered his cronies to attack, but his little gang was in for a huge surprise. This new and improved Ishij, fresh from a crash course in a brutal world, was ready to fight back. He'd survived an apocalypse where sleep was a myth and near-death experiences were a daily commute. He'd come back from the edge more times than he could count. The attackers called him cocky, but Hiju knew better. In his previous life, this level of confidence was the bare minimum to survive until lunch. Talk about a messy breakup. The worst backstabbing came from his so-called besties. Turns out, in the apocalypse, the real monsters weren't the zombies, but people who'd ghost their ethics for a can of beans. He remembered his old crew getting into heated arguments over the last slice of pizza except with guns. And these clowns in front of him, same desperate energy, just with way less style. Yep. They were the type of guys who'd accidentally trip you during a zombie chase. But hey, this was his second chance at a first impression, and he wasn't about to fumble this glow-up. No more past life fiascos. Meanwhile, Manhwa's jaw was on the floor as Ichigo dropped 2 goons like a bad habit. This was not the human doormat he'd bookmarked for daily bullying. Manhwa's brain was buffering. Was that a lucky shot? Or did he learn that from a viral TikTok dance? Yeah. It had to be a TikTok thing. Mita, bless his heart, charged in. clearly aiming for a dramatic finale. But Ichio caught the attack with one hand, like he was catching a slow-pitch softball. His eyes weren't scared, they were sparkling with a, "You're so going to regret this" kind of passion. Mineta suddenly felt a deep, urgent need to be somewhere else. The remaining stooges, now officially shook, finally got the memo. Ichio had just single-handedly cancelled Mineta and his whole fan club. The very same Ichio they'd tormented for 3 long years was now serving up a major glow-up. A wave of "oh crap" washed over them. If he could fold Mineta like clean laundry, they were basically next season's rags. Ichio, taking a dramatic breather, realized something was off. His old superpowers were still loading, like a video on bad Wi-Fi. And of course, Mineta had fainted before spilling the tea on today's date. Typical. He glanced around just in time to see the rest of the crew scrambling away like roaches when the lights come on. He yelled, "Hey, we weren't finished bonding, but they just booked it," muttering something lame about class. Oh. But Ichio was just getting warmed up. There was one last IOU to collect. He cornered a straggler, who started stammering like he was trying to ask his crush to prom. As the poor guy backed up, Ichio's mind drifted. April 20th, 2024. The world's big, ugly surprise party was scheduled for May 25th. That gave him about 1 month until the apocalypse dropped its new season. Time for a quick self-assessment after that little warm-up. He figured he was running on about 30% of his old mojo. Not exactly god tier yet, but definitely enough to be the king of high school drama. Alright. Next on the to-do list, a pre-apocalypse shopping spree. Super important. Then, a brilliant, sparkly thought hit him. He whispered dramatically to the air, "Show me my inventory," and poof, it appeared. Just like he'd hoped. He'd managed to bring his favorite accessory back with him. Okay. So his level had tanked from a mighty 50 to a measly 1. But hey, it still worked. He remembered when those special zones started popping up everywhere like trendy new cafes. Society basically had a complete meltdown. Total chaos. With no one left to call, humanity got a major case of the heebie-jeebies. Survival became the new it trend. And people started fighting over things like toilet paper and ramen. Desperate times called for some not-so-nice measures. And since those zones showed up randomly, you couldn't just hoard your snacks in one place. But then, plot twist, everyone got a starter pack, inventory. Level 1. You could stuff anything in there. But since time inside was on pause, you couldn't store your pet goldfish, which was a total bummer. Upgraded inventories were the ultimate status symbol. Basically a bigger cosmic purse. In his past life, Ichio had grinded so hard his inventory was the size of a freaking basketball court. Talk about a hoarding problem. Even though it was back to a dinky grade 1, it would do. For the new and improved him, the mission was crystal clear. Step 1, upgrade the magic backpack. Step 2, hoard snacks like a squirrel on espresso. And for that, he needed cash. A whole lot of cash, but with his past life cheat codes, an early access inventory, and a brain full of spoilers, his comeback was going to be epic. Oh, and right, there were those special people to deal with. Ichio was done being the before picture. This was his after, and he was going to serve his revenge piping hot. No matter what, some lackey pointed out. Guys, I think Mineta fainted. Hatano, feeling a major wave of annoyance, was so not having it. Someone was ordered to give him a refreshing splashdown, because the discussion was far from over. A lackey then reported that Mineta had fumbled the bag at school and failed to collect their protection money. As Mineta sputtered back to life, he weakly whimpered Hatano's name, but the head honcho wasn't having it, barking at him to get on his feet and stop being so dramatic. Seeing Mineta crawl back empty-handed at a time like this was just pouring gasoline on Hatano's fire. Mineta stammered out an excuse that his entire crew had been totally steamrolled by just one dude. Hatano absolutely lost it. If Mineta let that kid just waltz out of school, there would be hell to pay. The order was given. And Mineta, now wide awake and terrified, snapped to attention and agreed a little too quickly. Hatano told them to grab their goons and drag the little brat to him personally. The crew jumped to it. No questions asked. Hatano's temper had officially redlined. Ichigo was about to get rearranged. Permanently. The name suddenly clicked for him, Hatano Toshiki. Nearby, a couple of students were chatting, one asking the other to hang out. But his friend shot him down. Not wanting to ditch school, Ichigo recalled the rumors. Hatano was the big boss backing Mineta, a washed-up pro baseball player. The guy once had a monstrous swing that could send a ball into the next time zone. But, surprise, he had the personality of a hornet's nest and a nasty habit of coaching teammates with his fists for the tiniest mistakes. The final straw was when he gave a teammate a little too much batting practice with an actual bat, getting him kicked out of professional sports for good and into the seedy underworld. Just then, a student rushed up to Ichigo, pleading for him to wait. When he asked where Ichigo was off to, the reply was painfully simple. Class is over, so I'm heading home. The student looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Mineta's entire fan club was probably waiting for him at the school gate. He stammered that if Ichigo walked out there, he was going to be turned into a human pretzel. Outside, the gossip mill was already in full swing. They spotted Mineta looking like he'd argued with a bus, and figured his posse was there for some good old-fashioned revenge. The whispers started flying. I heard it went down on the rooftop. Then, the shocking reveal of his opponent's identity. Ichigo's name rippled through the crowd. A wave of panic hit his friends. They worried they'd been spotted and debated making a strategic retreat back inside. Ichigo, completely unfazed, just said again that he was going home. The other guy warned him again. Mineta's crew wasn't a bunch of softies like their leader. But in Ichigo's head, the impending apocalypse was kind of a bigger deal. With only 1 month left before zones started popping up and giant zombies crashed the party, he had way too much on his plate to prep. As if on cue, the welcome wagon made their move. One of the thugs called out to Ichigo, demanding he get over there. Another started shooing away the onlookers. They gave him a choice: come quietly, or they'd put on a show for everyone. Ichigo thought to himself that, yeah, trying to handle all this alone probably wasn't the smartest play long-term. But the guys pulling Mineta's strings, now they could be a useful resource. A student watched, mesmerized. As Ichigo was led away, the whispers started up again. Of all the people to pick a fight with, he had to choose Mineta. His fate was pretty much sealed. One burly student just muttered Ichigo's name, his voice heavy with concern. The goons reported back that Ichigo came without a fight. Us quiet, us a mouse. But Ichigo's mind was already 10 steps ahead. The second he'd clocked Mineta, his grand plan was officially in motion. He mumbled Hatano's name, knowing that a big ego is the fastest way for a hunter to get himself got. Hatano noticed how bizarrely calm Ichigo looked. Mineta sneered, saying he was just putting on a brave face. They launched into the classic bad guy speech. Mess with us, and there's no walking away. They offered a sliver of hope if Ichigo got on his knees and begged. Maybe, just maybe, they'd forgive him. Otherwise, he wasn't going home tonight. Then came the bill. Ichigo had to cough up at least 1 million yen. Before he could respond, someone lunged, screaming at him to hold still, threatening to rearrange his handsome legs. The attack was a blur, and one of them yelped like he'd won the lottery, only to realize his fist met nothing but air. Ishij had blocked it like he was swatting a fly, leaving the entire crew absolutely gobsmacked. In a flash, everyone was on the floor, looking like they'd just lost a dance-off. Mineta was totally bewildered, wondering how this nobody suddenly got an upgrade to unstoppable dreamboat. Hatano watched him, mesmerized. Every move was flawless, a perfect blend of offense and defense. And, was that a hint of cologne? This was definitely not your average after-school brawl. Was Ishijo really just a high school kid? Because that speed was something out of a superhero movie? Joe couldn't help but notice their fighting stances were wide open, practically begging for a beatdown. Meanwhile, Meta scrambled over to Hatano, who was coughing like he'd swallowed a bug. Thinking to himself, Hatano had to admit, this kid packed a punch that was way above his pay grade. And Ichigo's eyes, they were burning with a look that was both terrifying and kind of hot. Meta realized he'd poked a bear. A very handsome, very dangerous bear. A Tio. Seeing the writing on the wall, backed away slowly, announcing he was officially retiring from this whole mess. He declared that Mineta's fate was no longer on his to-do list, and even offered Acho the whole territory as a parting gift. Mineta just stood there, jaw on the floor, but Achi just waved him off, saying he couldn't care less about Mineta. His eyes were locked on Hatano. Now, it was Hatano's turn to be utterly confused. A little while later, a new guy strolled in, a smirk playing on his lips. Wait, you seriously got your butt handed to you by a high schooler? Don't tell me you're smitten. Hatano, completely flustered, shot back. Are you in or out? This kid isn't just some punk. The man just chuckled with an air of total confidence. Oh, taking care of your little problem is easy, he said. But it'll cost you. I want a 1/3 cut of your territory's earnings. That's my fee. Hatano balked. A third, for one kid, but the man just shrugged, reminding him, hey, you're the one who came crying to me. Besides, he added, with that big tournament coming up, you're a little short on cash, aren't you? And if word gets out about this little incident, your whole empire could come crashing down. Hatano paused, the guy's words ringing true. There was just something about Aikij that he couldn't shake. Was someone else pulling the strings? He remembered Ichigo's strange promise, I'll help you climb the ladder. It sent a shiver down his spine, no matter what. This Ichigo kid had to go. Hatano finally caved. Fine. Do it tonight. Make it quick. Pleasure doing business with you, the man said with a grin. We've got time, so try to chill out. But Hatano was anything but chill. He had a mountain of other problems piling up that needed his attention. And right on cue, a security guard at the lounge started yelling. He was shouting for someone to get out. Hatano turned, annoyed, and then his eyes went wide. A certain fearless, and frankly, gorgeous. The figure had just crashed the party. It was Ishigio. He announced he was looking for someone, and Hatano completely freaked out. How in the world did this kid find his top-secret man cave? One of the other guys saw Hatano's face drain of all color. Dude, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's up? Hatano could barely form a sentence. That's the high school kid, he stammered. The kid then announced he was there on his big brother's orders. Fresh from his little rumble with Mineta's crew earlier, Chijo had come to a simple conclusion. His current physique was just not cutting it. If he was going to get his payback, he desperately needed a glow-up. A total body makeover wasn't going to happen in a day. But for the moment, he had more important things to crash. Striding into the lounge, Ichigo boldly announced he was there on official Hatano business. One of the suits inside just scoffed, totally unimpressed by some kid playing gangster. As far as he was concerned, this kid's little stunt just screamed that he didn't know the first thing about how their club operated. The vibe in the room got real awkward, real fast. And another guy chimed in with his 2 cents. Hatano was sputtering, trying to explain the situation. But Kiji just talked right over him, announcing that, per Hatano's command, he'd already tidied up everyone outside. The only ones left were us. Hatano's brain just blue-screened. Someone screamed for the security footage. And when they rolled the tape, the screen confirmed it. The entire welcoming committee had been unceremoniously laid out. A wave of disbelief rippled through the room. Nobody could swallow the fact that a single student pulled this off. One guy even accused Ichijo of spiking their pre-brawl energy drinks, completely failing to compute what he'd just seen. Hatano's thoughts were basically a hamster on a wheel. Were those words I said earlier about promoting him actually serious? A cold panic began to set in. Oh man. He just walked into the season finale. Another guy. Watching Ichijo's slick moves. Noted. You know, that's not usually part of the standard high school P.E. curriculum. The order was finally barked out. Get him. Now Ichijo's absolute readiness was crystal clear. One of the men started to suspect this was more than a random brawl. Was Ichijo sent here to personally rearrange my face? He reminded everyone of the company's golden rule: you don't mess with family. But, he added, if someone else breaks that rule first, well, all's fair in love and war. Don't take it personally, Hatano. Meanwhile, tried to defend himself. He swore up and down that Ichijo was the one who told him to get the party started. He had no clue why Ichijo was now crashing it, but that didn't really matter. The boss decided that taking out Hatano would mean a lovely little inheritance of everything he owned. The rules had officially been tossed out the window, and the hostile takeover was on. Hatano cursed his luck. Dying here was definitely not on his to-do list. He knew talking was useless now. Running was the only play left. But still, what was this kid's real angle? And just like that, the chaos erupted. Ichijo moved like a whirlwind. One by one, guys were dropped with such clean, poetic motions. You'd think it was a dance number. Not a single step was out of place. One of the spectators just watched. Jaw on the floor. Ichijo had already taken out nearly everyone. At this rate, he was next on the dance card. The mood shifted to pure desperation. Ichijo had to be stopped, here and now. There was no other option. The leader yelled Hatano's name, demanding to know why he was just standing there like a decoration. Hatano finally stepped in. He said he couldn't just watch them pull a gun on a kid, it was just poor taste. The man shot back. You got beat by Ichijo, and now you're playing his knight in shining armor. Hatano didn't deny it. He admitted that even if Ichijo went down, it wouldn't save his own skin. In fact, keeping Ichijo around might actually be his golden ticket. The leader finally snapped. Fine. If you're going to side with Ichijo, you'll be the first to go. Hatano's mind started racing again. Was this kid really just in high school? Because of Ichijo? Every single one of his escape routes was now completely blocked. Even if he miraculously survived today, the organization was going to serve him his head on a platter. He cursed his terrible luck, getting completely outplayed by a teenager. Yet, in that insane moment, he also realized this kid was his one and only lifeline. The leader roared in frustration. Two people, just two, decided to pick a fight with me, and now my entire turf is at risk. Toshiki stood there in utter disbelief. He was completely consumed by the thought that in a single day, this brat had managed to wipe the floor with not just him, but everyone else too. Meanwhile, Ichijo brought up the little chat they'd had earlier that afternoon. Toshiki, already resigned to his fate, admitted that the organization wouldn't forgive him anyway, so he was pretty much out of moves. Still, he couldn't figure out why he was the one who won this unlucky lottery. Ichijo casually explained that their meeting was just a happy little accident. Toshiki just accepted that, knowing that if it weren't for that coincidence, he'd probably be the one lying beaten on the ground right now. Oh. Wait. Shifting gears to the messy reality of the situation, Toshiki asked. So, what's the plan for all this? Ichijo casually offered Toshiki the whole territory, reminding him of that promotion he'd promised. Toshiki, though pretty sure this was a terrible idea, agreed to give it a shot. He knew word of this little fiasco would rip through the organization like wildfire, putting a huge target on both of their backs. He asked what the next move was and what part he was supposed to play. Ichijo replied that it'd be a bit awkward for him to be seen, so Toshiki would have to be his big brother for now. And just like that night, it all began. Ichijo swore he'd make Toshiki a big shot and shoot him right up the ranks. Then, in the same breath, he demanded all of the organization's money. He made it very clear he needed a massive pile of cash. Toshiki was so stunned he could barely speak. A million sarcastic comments getting stuck in his throat. But honestly, where would he even start? Realizing arguing was useless, he decided to just go along with this insane plan and raised a mental glass to his own stupidity. Ichijo then reminded him that he was just a high school student before bluntly asking if he had any cash on him. Toshiki couldn't believe it. He was being shaken down by his new partner. With a sigh of defeat, he reluctantly forked over the money in his wallet. "I can get more if that's not enough," he mumbled. Ichijo glanced at the bills and said it was just about enough for a taxi fare. It dawned on Toshiki that he'd just allied himself with someone who was completely broke, and he started to think he was going senile. Ichijo, however, moved right on to serious matters. He asked about Toshiki's financial allies. Toshiki reported there were about 50 people over at Haraguri's place. They were a specialized crew. Pros at cleaning up messy situations, and way better equipped than his own guys. They were even packing firearms supplied by the organization. With his 30 guys thrown in, their total strength would more than double. But when you talk about money, Toshiki explained, both me and Haraguri are at the bottom of the food chain. We get peanuts. The real cash flow was controlled by the higher-ups. People like Reset, Seen, Ko, Yuet, and Owane Ren, who were in charge of the casinos, bars, and nightclubs. Kuei's Teresa ran the bodyguard services. And at the very top was the main boss, Koenagawa Tatsuya, who controlled every last cent. Toshiki mentioned that Koenagawa's birthday party was coming up, where the presents were really just tributes disguised as gifts. The more cash you gave, the more your status shot up. He and Haraguri had been desperately pulling money together for it. But after hearing Ichijo's wild scheme, none of it seemed to matter anymore. "Don't worry about it," Ichijo said with a grin. "Soon you'll be in that position." Toshiki just brushed it off, already resigned to Ichijo's particular brand of recklessness. He felt like an idiot for ever thinking this guy might get scared and back down. Toshiki then suggested the very normal step of exchanging contact info. But of course, Ichijo didn't even own a cell phone. Toshiki was floored all over again. He just couldn't get over how poor this guy actually was. Ichijo asked if he should just leave the unconscious guys or hang around. Toshiki assured him he'd already made the call and would handle it from here. Just then, Mineta and the other subordinates rolled up. One of them noted that all of Haraguri's crew had been completely wiped out, then looked at Ichijo, silently wondering who this kid was. Ichijo said his goodbyes and started to walk off. Toshiki yelled for Mineta and asked to borrow his brand new phone, then shoved it into Ichijo's hands. "It's got all my contact info," he insisted. Mineta stood there, frozen in shock. Ichijo just looked at the phone and said no thanks. But Toshiki, ever the drama queen, wouldn't let it go. He threw a hand on Ichigo's shoulder, getting all misty-eyed about how they were comrades now, and more importantly, Toshiki declared, with the sincerity of a soap opera star, he just couldn't bear to lose his precious lifeline. Ichigo expertly peeled the hand off his shoulder, telling Toshiki to chill out and stop overthinking it. Just follow the plan. "Dude." Then he made a swift exit before things got any weirder. Toshiki whipped around to face Mineta, his face a perfect picture of, "Are you kidding me?" and asked if that ice-cold dude was seriously his classmate. Mineta sheepishly admitted it was true, adding that until recently, Ichigo was basically a total pushover. Toshiki's jaw just about hit the floor, struggling with the idea that a pushover single-handedly wiped the floor with all of his guys. Manetta, still reeling, muttered by himself like he was trying to solve a complex math problem. Meanwhile, Toshiki was having a flashback to the seriously murderous vibe Ichigo was giving off earlier. Yeah. It was painfully obvious Ichigo still thought they were sketchy. They definitely hadn't made it to his BFFs list just yet. Strolling down the street, Ichigo checked out the text Toshiki had sent using Mineta's phone. Because apparently, they were sharing everything now. The message was basically, "Casino heist, tomorrow night. Get your beauty sleep." After reading it, Ichigo decided Toshiki wasn't just bold. He was certifiably nuts. That word comrades kept bouncing around in his head like a bad pop song. But honestly, it meant absolutely nothing to him. Nearby, a group of giddy girls were practically swooning over some celebrity named Aiduan on a giant screen. Ichigo glanced at the broadcast and scoffed to himself. Who needs comrades anyway? He had a one-track mind. And that track was paved with glorious, all-consuming revenge. And wouldn't you know it, the guy on the screen was the #1 target on his hit list. Of course. He was the son of some big-shot president whose company was in the world's top 10. In his past life, right after the Great Catastrophe hit, that very same company was the first to figure out the new rules of survival. They sent out all their little minions to snatch up every useful material in sight. They basically built a fortress of supplies and expanded their inventory like crazy. So even when the rest of the world was a total dumpster fire, their annoyingly brilliant management skills kept them floating high above the chaos. And even with this whole reborn cheat code, Ichigo knew he couldn't even get a receptionist on the phone in his current broke state. Forget about revenge. He needed a ridiculous, Scrooge McDuck-level pile of cash. And not just for his little revenge fantasy. Either. He also had that tiny little detail of the impending apocalypse to prepare for. So much for just focusing on himself. His plan: weaken their forces and find some allies before everything went sideways. Thinking of the name Numi, he made a dramatic, silent vow to return the pain tenfold. At a bus stop, a lady completely shattered his dark, brooding, snapping at him to get on the bus or get out of the way. He mumbled a quick apology, totally flustered, but just as he moved, things got super weird. The annoyed bus lady started to look, well, like a zombie. Ichigo was, to put it mildly, confused. He was pretty sure the zombie apocalypse wasn't scheduled for today. So, what gives? Some random person walking by just wrote off his stunned expression as stress and hurried away like he was a weirdo. Ichigo started to wonder if he was finally losing his marbles. Was it just a hallucination? He tried to pinpoint where the feeling was coming from, realizing it was the same vibe he'd felt ever since he was reborn. And just like that, a shimmering, glowing zone materialized right in front of him. Ichigo instantly knew it was a special zone. But his big question was why it was showing up, times before times the apocalypse. The weirdest part, nobody else seemed to see it. People were walking right through it like it was nothing. Completely oblivious. That mysterious feeling pulsed again, practically screaming at him to go in. Without a second thought, he sprinted forward, diving right in front of a car and making the poor driver shriek in terror. But Ichigo was laser-focused. If this zone was legit, and he was the only one who could get in a whole month early, then the loot inside would be stuff you couldn't get anywhere else. He could totally max out his inventory and be ridiculously prepared for the end of the world. There was zero time to second-guess it. He was going in. Even if it was a ridiculously risky move. High risk. High reward. Right. A notification popped into his head. Special Zone, Entry, Level 1. Ichigo couldn't believe his luck. Getting into a zone this early was unheard of. As he materialized inside, his eyes lit up as a notification popped into view, flashing like a new match on a dating app. Special mission. Take down 15 normal zombies and 1 super weird mutant in under an hour. Then find the safety house for a nightcap. The reward was so good it made his heart skip a beat. A 5 times reward. Was this some kind of exclusive VIP mission? He'd never gotten an offer this spicy in his past life? Maybe it was a perk of being born handsome. Or maybe that mysterious voice from earlier was his cosmic wingman. Whatever the reason, this was definitely a turn for the better. He shook his head, trying to focus on the date ahead. Nailing this mission was all that mattered now. Back in his old life, just finding a decent safe house on his first go-around was harder than getting a second date. Now he had to juggle 15 clingy zombies and 1 over-the-top mutant on a tight schedule. A guy had to get ready for the big night. He reminded himself of the #1 rule for these little apocalyptic mixers. The system always drops you in the lobby, a relatively chill spot where you can grab some complimentary survival snacks. But after that, you're on your own. Sweetheart. Any other goodies have to be sweet-talked out of the zone itself. Ishij, being a bit of a hoarder on first dates, grabbed everything that wasn't nailed down. Better to have it and not need it. Right. It might come in handy for the next disastrous get-together. But let's be real. Survival tools are just the appetizer. The real 5-star main course was the magic ore and crystal stones, and you could usually find that bling stashed away inside those cozy little safety houses. Magic ore, when you add a little cash, basically lets you upgrade to a bigger purse for all your stuff. It's stored in your private backpack and comes in 4 fabulous quality ranks. The fancier the zone, the higher the odds of finding that top-shelf ore, which makes carrying your emotional baggage way more efficient. On top of that, you have the crystal stones, which are basically the apocalypse's version of diamonds, with special features that became all the rage late in the world-ending game. These little gems became the secret ingredient for performance-enhancing potions and were a total game-changer for humanity's survival dates. Magic ore and crystal stones, humanity's new best friends, in a world that's trying to ghost us. The second I step out of this comfy lobby, the real awkward date begins. But hey, if the universe is really trying to set me up here, I could score enough loot to not have to date again for a whole month. There was just one tiny rule. Though, once you leave the starting area, you're committed. No turning back. This whole rendezvous required 3 things. But the most important was time, which was ticking away like a bad romantic comedy cliché. Even though I had some of my old charm left, I couldn't get too cocky. This new body of mine is a total lightweight. Even a beginner's mixer with 16 zombies, including that one seriously extra mutant, wasn't going to be a cakewalk. For now, finding the safety house's address would be a good exit strategy if the date goes south. But even with a plan, the difficulty of this whole setup and the general vibe of this zone felt way more intense than I remembered. My instincts screamed at me one more step, and I would have stumbled into a fatal first impression. The zombie ahead of me might have been a rookie, but its power and speed would make any normal guy feel seriously inadequate. A single love bite would lead to a very toxic relationship. Without the morning after cure from a safety house, turning into a zombie was 100% guaranteed. From my point of view, even a basic zombie was a pretty intimidating dance partner. And man, once they lock onto you, they are super clingy. They never give up. And your usual breakup lines won't stop their relentless pursuit. But Ishij remembered their one major turn off the head. One solid smack to the noggin. And it was lights out. The monitor pinged, confirming his progress. You've successfully ghosted one normal zombie. 56 minutes left on the clock. Finding a house in these starter neighborhoods was usually a piece of cake. Most of the guests were clumped by the entrance. So, naturally, he decided to head in the complete opposite direction, flying solo in this corner of the party. He couldn't afford a single social slip-up. He had to conserve his charm and dodge any chatty groups at all costs. And save his best lines for the main event, the ultimate party boss. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with a text. Special mission. Gashin is here. A certified 10. With arms that looked like they could crush a watermelon and a personality to match. His stomach dropped. The final boss was already on the scene. Gashin had shown up way earlier than he'd braced himself for. He knew the legends about this one. Gashin was notoriously intense. They said Gashin's sheer presence could crush your confidence the second you were trapped in a conversation. In the early days of his last disastrous relationship, countless hopefuls had their nights completely ruined. A direct approach was social suicide. This part of the room had terrible acoustics for charming conversation. He needed a new spot. Stat. Ichio had to admit. Gashin's charisma level was way out of his league, but then Ichio remembered something. For all that intensity, Gashin's conversational tactics weren't that different from the usual clingy partygoers. If he could just use that to his advantage and steer the chat to a topic he actually knew something about, he might just have a shot. But just then, a fresh wave of small talkers closed in. He was completely cornered. This couldn't be how his night ended. Not by the cheese platter. He balled his hands into fists. A mix of frustration and sheer will bubbled up, fueled by the humiliation of his last breakup, the betrayal of that "we should just be friends" text. He refused to get shot down again. He would survive this party. He'd get his revenge by having an amazing time. And most importantly, he would reclaim his social mojo all by himself. Ichio delivered a zinger so powerful it sent his conversational opponent reeling back toward the dip station. But in that moment, he was genuinely surprised. The guy's comeback was way quicker than he'd anticipated. He just missed the perfect chance to gracefully exit the conversation. With his current supply of witty banter, even pointing out the ridiculousness of Gashin's constant flexing wouldn't land a solid hit. Okay. This whole being charming thing was turning out to be way harder than he remembered. His mind immediately jumped to the safety zone, the bar. He remembered it was on the first floor. He needed to inch closer, just in case this social nightmare got any worse. Suddenly, a dance floor fiend lunged at him from behind for a forced conga line. But Ichio ducked and weaved like a pro, sending the guy stumbling into a potted plant. He let out a sigh of relief. But the persistence of these party animals was relentless. More guests started closing in, asking about his job. He fought them off, swinging with polite but firm deflections. He practically yelled, "It's complicated," while trying to keep them at bay, desperately trying not to spill his drink. And amid the chaos, the massive shadow of Gashin returned. Gashin launched into a story right at him, crashing down with the full weight of their ego in the now very cramped personal space. Ichio glanced at his available resources, a soggy napkin and a nearly empty drink. Not exactly the tools he needed to successfully flirt his way out of this. The pressure was on. He couldn't afford a single awkward pause. This was it. The beginning of his "look how great I'm doing" revenge tour. The first step to winning the breakup. He made a snap decision. It was time for a strategic retreat to the bar. Putting some space between himself and Gashin was his only hope for social survival. But just as he pivoted to escape, the sound of Gashin's ridiculously loud shoes on the hardwood floor made it clear he'd been noticed. A quiet curse escaped at his lips. This corner was getting more awkward by the second, and then he saw an opening. His eyes locked on a tiny piece of spinach in Gashin's teeth. He focused. This was his moment. With no other witty remarks on hand, Ichio committed to a bold new strategy. He would slowly chip away at Gashin's intimidating composure, one awkward truth at a time, even if it meant taking baby steps with each swing. But this axe he was lugging around, it was on its last legs. The closer one of these walkers gets to biting the dust for good, the bigger a tantrum it throws. Their aggression literally doubled in that final frenzy state. If he could just take out that last working arm, he might actually wrap this up. He swung for the fences. It was a solid hit. But the zombie didn't even blink. It just wasn't enough. He clenched his jaw. He was so close. Just a little more. Just one final shove. But his arms and legs decided to go on strike. The exhaustion and battle damage had finally caught up. He was stuck. And then, the awful truth dawned on him. If he gets nipped now, it's curtains. He'd be right back to being a zombie. Just like in his first go-around with this whole apocalypse thing, a wave of pure frustration washed over him. Where did it all go wrong? Why did he have to go through all this drama a second time? He had clawed his way to survival back then. He'd fought with every fiber of his being. And yet, right in the middle of his pity party, a voice whispered from nowhere, "Do it." The words were staticky at first, like a bad radio signal from some other dimension. But slowly, they sharpened, grew louder. The voice, it belonged to that zombie girl Joe had taken out earlier. And she spoke again, basically telling him to get his payback. Ichigo felt a bizarre, warm tingle spread through his body. His wounds were knitting themselves back together at lightning speed, sealing up completely in mere seconds. The shock hit him as he put two and two together. He'd been infected by the zombie virus. Except, he wasn't turning into a brain eater. Not only that, but his injuries were completely gone. Like they'd never even been there. This was impossible. The virus should have already taken over. Yet something inside him was giving it a big, nope. He had a sneaking suspicion it had something to do with the mystery voice in his head. The voice didn't feel like an intruder. It was weirdly familiar, like it was coming from inside him all along. And then, it clicked. He had totally heard that voice before. The memories came rushing back in a tidal wave. In his previous life, he'd crossed paths with a level 100 zombie named Tail. Back then, his mind was a fog of rage, focused only on getting to the safe house. But he remembered that last moment, right before he was toast. By that point, the whole domain had already crashed. Both he and Tail should have become zombies and popped out into the real world. But now he was sure of it, she had jumped into him before the domain winked out of existence. She had hitched a ride back to this world with him. She was his new, undead roommate. And suddenly, everything made a crazy kind of sense. The vision he had of the domain before everything went sideways. His get out of zombie free card. His new instant healing powers. It was all her doing. But that brought up a whole new can of worms. Was he even still human? The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He'd made it this far thanks to the power of a zombie. The one thing in the world he used to hate with a passion. But honestly, who cares about the details now? If it helped him get his revenge, he was more than willing to let her take the driver's seat. Using a zombie's power meant his vengeance tour could kick into high gear. Those traitors, Hope, and the other four, were all going to get what was coming to them. Their time was officially running out. He was gasping for air. But he'd finally dragged himself to the safety house. The sweet spoils of war were waiting for him, just past the sparkly transfer gate. The place was a carbon copy of the level 1 safe house from his past life. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. He stepped through, his eyes doing a quick sweep of the area. A beginner magic stone was sitting right there, waiting for him. The domain was legit. This was really happening. Even the rewards were 5 times bigger. Just like the mission description promised. He wondered if the items worked the same way they did in his past life. His inventory was currently stuck at level 1. If he used 5 beginner magic stones, he figured he could push it to level 3. Without a second thought, he dove into his inventory. 2 stones vanished to hit level 2. Another 3 were sacrificed for the next upgrade. Boom. 5 new slots in his inventory. Mission accomplished. The domain started to pixelate around him. He was on his way out. Just as he'd hoped. The magic stones were still good to go. The next few months were going to be a game changer. Not only was the loot 5 times sweeter, but the stat boost from clearing the domain got that juicy multiplier too. Alright. One last little thing to check. He pulled out the crystal, practically humming with the zombie virus. If you knew what you were doing, you could whip up all sorts of potions with it. But he was still in the dark on the specifics. One wrong move, and you could accidentally turn some poor soul into a brain muncher. And speak of the devil, a little chaos was brewing just down the street. Some drunk guy was giving a girl a hard time, getting way too handsy. She was trying to push him away, but he clearly wasn't taking no for an answer. Isha accidentally slammed right into the creep, creating the perfect diversion. In that split second, he slipped the crystal right into the guy's body. The clueless drunk just stumbled off to find another drink. The next morning dawned, and the area was wrapped in police tape. Cops were everywhere, telling people to back off and not mess with the evidence. The rumor mill was churning. Someone had kicked the bucket in that alley. Word on the street was that the body looked, well, not normal. Another squad car pulled up. Sirens off. A couple of officers were grumbling about getting a call first thing in the morning. The lead investigator, a Mr. Corzona, was met by his team. They told him they'd never seen anything like it. Meanwhile, a girl peeked past the police line, saw the body, and froze solid. That thing lying in the alley wasn't just a dead body. There was something about it that sent a chill straight to her soul. The foul stench hit Mr. Corzona as he approached. He took one look and knew. Alcohol poisoning. Clear as day. He ordered them to process it as an accident, then sarcastically clapped an officer on the back. Congrats. You just boosted your arrest rate again. The officer, missing the sarcasm entirely, turned to the girl who found the body and gave her a heartfelt thank you. Kurzono yelled for his partner, telling Natsu Matsuoka to pack it up. Their job here was done. But Natsu wasn't moving. Are we really just leaving it like this? She asked, a worried look on her face. I really don't think this is that simple. She suggested grabbing a blood sample for the lab. But Kurzono cut her off. Listen, rookie. If I say we're done, we're done. She pushed back, insisting the blood didn't look right. Kurzono reminded her she was just a trainee and told her not to get a big head just because she studied overseas. You're going to follow my lead. You hear me, he barked. And if you want a passing grade on your practical, you'll learn to keep your nose out of it. When she opened her mouth to argue again, he just snapped. Get out of my way. Matsu mentioned a witness saw the dead guy in a little tiff with a student the night before. Kurzono couldn't have cared less. Watching from the sidelines, Hiju took it all in. He just wanted to see if the zombie virus worked on humans before the world went sideways. And now he had his answer. No zombie transformations before the main event, but something far more important had just clicked into place. He had to get Natsum on his team. Natsu Matsuoka wasn't just some girl. In her past life, she was a genius-level pharmacist. The kind who could turn crystal stones from the domain into world-changing potions. Her special potions were pretty much the only thing stopping people from becoming super cranky. Brain-hungry monsters. Even the toughest dudes on the block relied on her genius. All thanks to her wild curiosity. Of course, that same curiosity is what eventually got her into a major jam. She decided to play guinea pig for one of her own concoctions. And let's just say, it didn't end well for her. Ichigo saw she was a total game changer. If he could just get her brewing those potions for him again, his ability to kick butt, both in the real world and the domain, would skyrocket. Natsune tried to get Kurzono's attention, but the guy was already laser-focused. In this lifetime, he swore he'd make her part of his crew. Natsum, getting seriously annoyed by Kurzono's attitude, decided to go full-on solo detective. Ichigo casually strolled up to her and introduced himself as the high school kid she was trying to find. Elsewhere, Toshiki was grilling his subordinate, asking why they rented such a dump and were scrubbing it like they were expecting the queen. That's when Ichigo waltzed in to check on their progress. Toshiki confirmed everything was ready to go, then asked how a guy like Ichigo even knew about this forgotten laboratory. Ichigo just played it cool, saying a little bird told him. At that moment, one of Toshiki's guys spotted Natsum and just about forgot his own name. He was so floored by her. Natsum walked in, her jaw dropping at how huge the lab was. The place was sparkling, but she sheepishly admitted she had no idea how to run any of the fancy machines. Ichigo had a flashback. This was the exact lab she'd used after the world went sideways. Ichigo told Toshiki he needed a private word with Natsum and asked him to hang back for a bit. Watching Ichigo go to all this trouble for Natsum, Toshiki couldn't help but wonder who she was. He had no clue what Ichigo was up to, and even thought it might be the most over-the-top pickup attempt in history. As Ichigo started his big pitch to Natsum, he showed her a little something, explaining it was the reason some poor guy had checked out early. Natsum immediately wanted to get her hands on it, but Ichigo swooped in, warning her not to touch it. He insisted it was way too dangerous, and promised he'd be the one to figure out what the heck the substance was made of. Natsum, sensing there was more to the story, cut right to the chase. Okay. Why did you really drag me to this mad scientist's dream house? Ichigo couldn't help but smile at how sharp she was and admitted, You got me. I need your brilliant brain to help me with this crystal thing. She just raised an eyebrow. Why me and not Kurozono? The guy who's supposedly more qualified. Ichigo thought back to everything he knew about her studying abroad in middle school, majoring in forensic medicine, and racking up awards like they were candy. And now she was back in Japan, basically working as an intern. Realizing how much he knew about her, Natsum asked, Okay, did you stalk me? Or is there an actual point to this? Ichigo confirmed. Oh, there's definitely a point. He told her that everything he was about to say was completely off the record. But before I spill the beans, I need to ask you one thing. Are you willing to join our little club? If you say yes, this whole laboratory is your new playground, with all the shiny crystal stones you could ever want. I'll even pick up the tab for all the research. You're about to see a side of the world you never knew existed. But if you say no, this conversation never happened. And I promise you, it'll be like we never met. As he expected, Natsum caught on fast. She explained, this crystal has a bug in it, one that causes people to expire in a very weird way. It's not like a normal lights out. The body keeps moving, but nobody's home. It's not human anymore. Ichigo noted that while their test subject hadn't gotten up for a stroll, his body had gotten ridiculously ripped after he passed. If that guy had started moving, he would have been way stronger than he ever was alive. That's what some people are calling the living dead. You know, zombies. Turns out that Sparkly Rock had two very different vibes going on. One part that makes you a super grumpy, brain-dead party pooper, and another that basically turns you into a superhero. So, his big ask was for her to play mixologist. Split those two up, and whip up a little something that gives people super strength. No zombie shuffling required. Yeah. Just a tiny little problem. It was ridiculously hard. Needing the good stuff to be, like, 100% pure, or as close as humanly possible. The potion's street cred was all about that purity level. Natsu's jaw basically hit the floor. She shot back. Wait. Does this mean our little nap taker in the other room is going to get up and dance? Ishu just nodded, confirming it would. But you know, not in a rush or anything. He could see the million questions buzzing in her head, but gently told her to put a pin in it and just focus on being besties with the shiny rock for now. And hey, bonus, he'd already set her up with a sweet little crash pad on the floor below, so she could basically live, breathe, and sleep this project. Just as he was making a dramatic exit, she called out, stopping him in his tracks. I didn't catch your name, she said, with a charming little smirk. He introduced himself, Shina. Ichigo got on the horn with Hatano and basically told Mineta, you're on babysitting duty with our new brainiac. Natsum. Mineta just gave a little, you got it, boss. As Hatano and Ichigo made their grand escape, they started plotting their next big adventure. Hatano, ever the curious one, asked, so, where to next, and how's Hariguri holding up? Ichigo puffed out his chest and said, oh, everyone's following me. Or, you know, big brother. Hatano rolled his eyes, cutting in. Dude, we talked about this. Ahiji isn't big brother anymore. He's the head honcho now. And it's time he started acting like it. That whole domain thing, totally legit. And those magic potions are pretty much yesterday's news. The only thing missing from this perfect picture was a giant pile of cash. With just a look, Ichigo told Atano it was time to suit up. Their next stop on the tour was obvious, a date with Mr. Big Bucks. Speaking of whom, by the tender age of 20, a fellow named Rina Gain had already, let's say, redecorated with a lot of red. This guy was the poster child for climbing the corporate ladder. If the ladder was made of his enemies and the rungs were super stabby, these days, he was the king of the party scene, running the whole entertainment division with a flashy portfolio of casinos and nightclubs. Of all his toys, the casino was his absolute biggest cash cow. And boy, did the people come flocking to it every single day. You could hear the happy screams bouncing off the walls as people threw down their bets and cheered their wins. One guy was practically singing after a lucky streak, while others were dramatically shoving all their chips forward, praying for that one big score to change everything. But, spoiler alert, the story usually had a much darker ending. Only a tiny, lucky few ever actually walked out winners. Most folks just left with a suitcase full of regret and a shopping list of broken dreams, only to come back tomorrow hoping to win it all back. And that desperation, oh, it was the house's favorite flavor. The unlucky ones were always offered a friendly loan, which was a great way to dig their hole a little deeper. One poor soul was on his knees, begging for just a little more time and swearing he'd pay it all back. That's when they casually reminded him of his grand total. A cool 10 million yen. The guy's eyes bugged out, sputtering that he only borrowed 2 million. But oh, that pesky, sky-high interest had a way of adding up. All spelled out in the fine print he definitely didn't read. When he couldn't cough up the cash, things got personal. They just so happened to mention his daughter, who'd just started kindergarten. The message was crystal clear: pay up, or his family would have a very very bad day. Fueled by rage, the guy started screaming about getting even, but the ship had sailed. As per company policy, a little parting gift was sent to his family, you know, the one you can't point with anymore. The organization then kindly requested 16 million yen for the safe return of their new house guest. Yeah. These were the kind of heartwarming business tactics Renovane was famous for. And with customer service like that, he'd managed to bankroll almost the entire organization. We're talking tens of billions here. Shortly after that little incident, an invitation went out. It seemed Mr. Renovane wanted a little sit-down with Hitano and the crew. When Toshiki and his +1 showed up, some overeager guards tried to play hero. Toshiki just gave them a look and told them to take a hike. You could cut the tension in the room with a knife, as Ren Owen greeted them with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He casually snooped around Harigor's domain, you know, just to confirm it was the real deal. Then came the real, juicy reason for this little get-together, with the boss's birthday just around the corner. Toshiki, ever the romantic, suggested they do something truly special. Renogani, who never passed up a chance to complicate things, offered a little trade. He'd help Toshiki look like a total stud in front of the boss. But in return, he wanted both Toshiki's and Harigor's domains. The nerve Toshiki had practically risked life and limb for that domain. And now this guy expected him to just hand it over. Totally insulted. He fired back, calling Ren a washed-up, pathetic old man. But Ren just cackled, calling Toshiki a fool for showing up to this party with a crew of only 3 guys. At that, Tiki's subordinate started to panic. The casino's security team alone was 100 strong. To them, this looked less like a plan and more like a hilarious way to get tossed out. But Toshiki was cool as a cucumber, telling his men to just follow his lead. They weren't going to win with sheer numbers. The goal was to keep unnecessary drama and hurt feelings to a minimum. A little razzle-dazzle at the other entrances would buy them some time. As the plan kicked off, Toshiki reminded them to always act like they could afford the bill, being the guy in charge. He took point, ordering his crew to get moving. His subordinate hesitated, probably wondering if this was a good time to fake an injury, but then he swore he was all in. And just like that, the party started. Ren screamed for his guys to attack, and the whole place erupted into a chaotic mosh pit. Toshiki and his buddies were completely swamped. Then, a massive subordinate of Reno's stepped into the fray. His presence alone made things super awkward. This guy was basically Ren's personal bodyguard, the one who'd saved his hide in countless petty squabbles. A punch came flying but missed by a mile. Ayu checked on his pal, who confirmed he was A-okay. Compared to that ridiculously intense guy from yesterday, this one was practically moving in slow motion. Still, they were warned to play it cool. This little scuffle had to be kept on the down low to avoid bothering the other guests. Everyone nodded in agreement. But Ren, watching from his VIP suite above, gave his final audi. Totally not chill command without a second thought. He ordered his men to, take care of them. And that's when the real dance-off ignited. Toshiki and Ahiju squared up against Reno. Blows were exchanged with almost comical precision. Ren moved with the calculated aggression of a man who'd just been served cold coffee. backed by his overwhelming ego and general grumpiness. Toshiki struck back with the fury of someone avenging a terrible first date. Ishu fought with laser focus, channeling the experience of 1,000 awkward encounters. The room had become a full-blown battlefield. It was a clash between the cold-hearted kingpin and two guys with absolutely nothing left to lose. As the epic tussle raged on inside the casino, Hiju faced Rina Gain's top goon head-on. His gaze locked onto the man's leg. His next brilliant target. He charged forward, aiming to give him a wicked Charlie horse. Renavain watched, completely stunned. What he was seeing just seemed impossible. Outside the chaos, nervous voices filled the air. Someone shouted, wondering if the cavalry had arrived yet. Suddenly, a subordinate burst in, calling out to Toshiki and apologizing for being fashionably late. Toshiki demanded to know why the rescue party was so ridiculously small. The subordinate explained that every single road leading to the casino was mysteriously stuck in the worst traffic jam in history, preventing their backup from getting there on time. Back inside, Ichigo confronted Ren. He asked if this little traffic nightmare was Ren's handiwork. Ichigo admitted it. He had orchestrated the entire gridlock. Ren, absolutely furious, screamed that his remaining guys were more than enough to finish them off. He promised them a whopping 2 million yen if they could just get the job done. But his offer fell on deaf ears. In a sudden, dramatic shift, everyone witnessed something truly shocking. Rino Gain tripped, falling from his office and collapsing onto the floor below with a dramatic thud. His so-called elite bodyguards were already taking a synchronized nap on the floor. A hush fell over the room, followed by a tidal wave of juicy gossip. Everyone recognized Ren as the guy who owned this whole sparkly money pit. So seeing his crew down for the count was, to say the least, confusing. Some guessed it was just some spicy internal drama, while others just stared, completely floored that one guy had folded all of Ren's tough guys like a cheap suit. Toshiki then strolled forward, looking as chill as a penguin in a freezer, and announced with a charming smile that, as of right now, there were some management changes. He was the new big cheese, Hatano Toshiki. And to kick things off, he was giving every single customer a little welcome gift of 10,000 chips. The crowd went absolutely wild. Cheers bounced off the walls of the casino as everyone suddenly decided they loved the new boss. But just as the party was getting started, another figure appeared, and the mood did a complete 180. The whispering started up all over again. It was Iduan. Jaws literally hit the floor. Why was a big shot like him here, Iduan? However, just casually sauntered over, cool and collected. He gave Toshiki a nod, mentioning he sometimes dropped by to unwind, and that he'd heard a bit of a ruckus coming from the VIP room, so he came to check out the commotion. He glanced at the human-shaped mess on the floor and commented, "You know, Renovan is a friend of mine. Toshiki, ever, the social butterfly, tried offering a handshake, suggesting they could be the best of pals from here on out, but Iduan shot him a look that could freeze fire, warning him his tone was getting a little bit reckless. Toshiki suddenly felt a pressure that was just intensely awkward. It was a seriously intimidating vibe rolling off Iduan. He then turned to Ichigo and asked, "You need a hand with this." He clocked Ichigo's youthful vibe and hit the nail on the head, guessing he was still a student. Meanwhile, Ichigo's internal calculator started doing some very grim math. He pieced it together. These guys had been cooking up this scheme for ages. This wasn't a new plan. It had been in the works from the very beginning. He mentally scrolled through the guest list: Minago Tatsuhiro, Ishaki, Lala, Rick, and Irman Ian Kibu. These weren't just random people. They were the heirs to the corporate empires that basically ran the financial world. Even after the world went sideways, they were still living their best, carefree lives, having cleared all the pesky obstacles a long time ago. This whole trap had been set for him ages ago. Nearby, the crumpled form of Ren-On started crawling desperately towards Iduan. He grabbed onto Iduan's leg, pleading, Kukan. Buddy. You gotta save me. He promised he'd pay any price. Whatever it took. But Iduan looked completely bored. One of his loyal bodyguards stepped forward. Respectfully, he brought up repaying some old debt. But Iduan just waved him off. That's ancient history. He then turned his attention back to Ichigo. Taking care of a clown like him, he said, is easier than making my morning coffee. If it weren't for all these witnesses, I would have sent him on a permanent vacation right here. But it's his lucky day, I guess. With nothing left to add, Iduan turned to bounce. But before he left, he shot Ichigo a look. We'll be seeing each other again. Then he ordered his men to find out everything about the boy. His subordinates gave a crisp nod. Back in the main casino, Toshiki was hyping up the crowd, telling everyone to keep the party going. He announced the free chips would be making the rounds soon. And the celebration kicked right back into gear. Ichigo watched the whole spectacle play out. His mind was on fire. He was so close to finishing them right then and there. But he wasn't about to let them get off that easily. Oh no. Not yet. Not until he'd personally dragged every single one of them into the most embarrassing pit of despair imaginable. After the drama died down, Ichigo turned to Awin with a calm, commanding air. He asked, So, do you think the message was received loud and clear, without missing a beat? He demanded the casino's entire take for the day. Caught completely off guard, Ijuin just stammered for a moment before replying. He confessed he didn't have the exact figure and would have to check. But Ishiju cut him off. He gave a simple, direct order: use every last penny of the earnings to buy gold. And it had to be an immediate, on-the-spot transaction. A baffled Adrian had to ask why. Since the whole request sounded a little nuts, Ishiju dismissed him completely. The reason was none of Adrian's business. He didn't give a damn how expensive the gold was. Just that it was bought and shipped to the lab. Pronto. And with that, Ishiju announced he had things to do and breezed out, heading for home. As he walked off, his mind was already racing with plans. His inventory capacity could only be expanded up to level 10 using those basic beginner magic stones. But to push past level 10, he needed a much rarer material gold. Just to reach level 11 required a whopping 360 units of it. After that, the amount needed would climb to insane levels. In the apocalyptic future, huge stashes of gold were burned through in the blink of an eye. Knowing this all too well, Ishiju knew he had to start stockpiling supplies while he had the chance. His #1 priority was beefing up that inventory. He decided to pawn off the gold-buying chore to Hatano. As he was focused on hunting down special domains, something suddenly shifted in the atmosphere. Ishiju felt a faint but distinct reaction. A special domain was revealing itself. He immediately whipped his head toward the source, his eyes locking onto the direction. It was a school. Of all the places, a special domain had just popped up at a high school. The scene then shifts to a perfectly normal day there. During Ishiju's absence, a nerdy-looking student had claimed his desk. But 2 wannabe tough guys quickly swaggered over to mock him for it. The student nervously mumbled Ishiju's name, wondering aloud if he was okay. But one of the bullies just brushed it off. He sneered that Ishiju wasn't coming back anyway. Not after getting hauled off by Minena's crew. They figured he was probably taking up a hospital bed and decided taking his seat was fair game. Still, the bully whined that it was a major pain not having his personal errand boy around. Just then, Ishiju himself strolled into the classroom. One of the goons immediately puffed up his chest, telling him to scram or get ready for a beatdown. Utterly shocked, the nerdy kid just gaped in disbelief. The other bully hesitated, reminding his pal that Ishiju had even decked Mineta. They just couldn't wrap their heads around him being back without a single scratch. A wave of whispers and gossip immediately swept through the classroom. Was his return a good thing or a total bummer? The nerdy student quickly plastered on a fake smile to hide his shock, claiming he was so happy and grateful that Ishiju had stood up for him. Elsewhere in his mind, Ishiju was thinking about the night before, when he'd visited the school where the domain had now appeared. He wondered if maybe the domain's generation wasn't fully complete yet, which might be why he could still sense it bubbling to the surface. His gut told him it would make its grand entrance the next day. Right at that moment, Mayame Miki, the class idol, glided over to him. In his previous life, Ishiju had been totally under her spell like every other guy. Her stunning looks had all the boys wrapped around her little finger. She had a real talent for turning them into her personal army of obedient followers. She mentioned how she missed the breakfast Ishiju usually bought her and demanded he go get it right now so they could share it. She even confessed she'd considered finding a new errand boy, but Ishiju just gave her a deadpan stare, flatly refused, called her an eyesore, and told her to go buy it herself. Miki blinked, feigning complete surprise as if she couldn't possibly have heard him right. The boys orbiting her, however, absolutely erupted. They started shouting, accusing him of disrespecting their queen and demanding he show some gratitude that she was even talking to him. Miki then tried to play peacemaker, calming down her frantic fans. They tried to play it off like they were all just classmates. But the other guys weren't buying it. One of them cracked his knuckles, announcing it was time. Ichigo learned his lesson the hard way. As they lunged at him, Ichigo just scoffed on the inside. He vaguely remembered being pushed around by losers just like these in his past life. It was almost hilarious that he'd ever been scared of these clowns. Of course, more pointless yelling followed. They warned him not to get a big head just because he took down Mineta. But, speak of the devil, Mineta himself appeared right at that moment. The whole crowd went silent, totally stunned to see him already back on his feet. A student whispered, "No way." Mineta marched forward, clearly looking for a rematch. His new little fan club was all fired up. They started shouting at Ichigo to back the heck off, calling Mineta Big Bro, which made everyone do a double take. Since when did that happen? One of the guys hesitated, saying he'd already eaten. But Mineta just barked at him to go buy his share anyway. The kid just meekly nodded and scurried off. Then, he turned to Ichigo and asked why his phone was off. Apparently, Esuoka had been trying to call him a bunch of times with no luck. That was the whole reason he'd come all the way to school to find him. Ichigo just gave a casual shrug and said he forgot to charge it. Then asked what Esuoka wanted. He said she'd made some kind of major breakthrough, something that might be related to the development of the horn. Ichigo just acknowledged it with a nod and sent the guy on his way. The teacher then called for class to start, telling everyone to open their textbooks to page 50, but Ichigo was lost in thought. Realizing this nice, peaceful school life was probably about to come to a screeching halt. And suddenly, a system message popped up in his vision. Special domain entry, level 5. A special mission had just kicked off. Enter the safe house in 20 minutes. The final reward was a 5 times multiplier. Ichigo felt that old familiar rush of entering a domain again. Man, it had been a while. In his previous life, getting used to this kind of sudden change of scenery took some time. But now, he was already sizing up the situation. First things first, he needed to find some usable items. He scanned the area around him. Unfortunately, there were 0 recovery items anywhere. This domain was definitely playing on a higher difficulty setting than the last one. Still, he got ready to make a move. This was a race against the clock now. His #1 objective, locate that safe house. The one huge advantage he had was a perfect mental map of the area. With his past knowledge, he could cut down the exploration time to practically nothing. He immediately pinpointed the safe house's location. It was right in the middle of the school playground. But, of course, a massive problem presented itself right away. The whole area was swarming with zombies. Trying to bust through them head-on would be a really bad idea. There was no way he could take them all down in under 20 minutes. Then he noticed something he'd missed. The zombies were all gathering around one that had fallen over. What was with the sudden flash mob? And then it clicked. They were drawn to the sound of it hitting the ground. A brilliant, crazy idea started to form. If he could just create a sound loud enough, he could kite the entire zombie horde away from the safe house. It was a huge risk, but it was his only shot at success. He glanced toward a very specific location, the only place on campus that could make enough noise to get all of their attention at once. If he could just get to that spot, he could clear a path to the safe house in one fell swoop. Ichigo stood at the edge of the school grounds, his eyes locked on his target, the broadcasting room. That was the linchpin of his entire plan, to lure that sea of zombies away from the safe house. He had to get into that room and make a racket so loud it would pull every last one of them in that direction. He quickly ran through the school's layout in his mind. Right now, he was in the central wing. The broadcasting room was on the top floor of the north building. To get there, he'd have to use the connecting walkway that linked the central wing to the target building. Once he was across, he'd have to book it to the far end and take the stairs all the way up to the top floor, not one to dilly-dally. Ichigo slipped into the cozy little connecting passage. But of course, 3 uninvited guests were already blocking the way, seeing as there was nowhere to duck and hide. And detouring would be a total time waster. He decided to just say hello. Up close and personal, he moved like a ninja on a coffee buzz, giving each one a polite, silent tap to send them on their way, trying desperately not to wake the neighbors in the main building. After showing those party crashers the exit, he waltzed into building number 4. Man, this place was way more of a labyrinth than he remembered. It was all spooky. Maze-like hallways full of shadows and boo corners. And even though no zombies were in sight, the place had way too many hiding spots for a game of hide-and-seek he did not sign up for. There was zero time to cook up some genius plan. Guess he'd just have to wing it. So, he started sprinting down the hall like he was late for a date. Ichigo finally spotted the stairs to the broadcasting room, his golden ticket at the end of the hall. But just as he took a step, a surprise guest star made its grand entrance. A zombie leaped out from behind a pillar like a bad jump scare. And this was no regular extra. This was the star of the show. An elite one, apparently. These guys kept their old human talents. This one must have been a jock in its past life. Before he could even process that, the zombie quarterback tackled a nearby locker, making a crash so loud it could wake the dead. Oh. Wait. The racket echoed everywhere, and that one little bang was all it took. It was like ringing the dinner bell for the entire school. All the nearby zombies started shuffling over, all beelining for the source of that glorious noise. Ichigo muttered something not so nice under his breath. Welp. So much for the stealthy approach. He made a break for the stairs as the hallways started to get uncomfortably crowded. More and more unwanted company poured in from both ends, all answering the call of the locker smash. There was no way he could dodge this crowd. One got a little too friendly, its claw giving his side a little, "How do you do?" And then came the mosh pit. A whole wave of the undead flooded in from every direction, totally jamming up the hallway. Ichigo had to do a little backward shuffle. This skinny hallway wasn't exactly a dance floor, leaving him zero room to bust a move. With the clock ticking and his new fan club getting way too close, Ichigo realized it was Hail Mary time. His only move was to bet it all on one crazy play. One tiny slip-up and, well, it wouldn't be pretty, but hey, no pressure. Seeing his opening in all the chaos, Ichigo pulled a Houdini and zipped right through the corridor. He practically fell into an empty classroom and took cover, leaning against the wall trying to remember how to breathe. But of course, the big, beefy zombie who started this whole mess decided to follow him in for a little chat. Meanwhile, miles away, in a lab, Natsume was deep in her science-y zone, trying to get 2 very cranky elements to stop clinging to each other. But no matter how gently she tried to coax the materials apart, the zombie-cootie ratio in the magic ore was just stubbornly high. The purity was barely hitting 60%. And that much virus was a definite no-go. She devoured every single paper she could find. But there was nothing on a virus this weird. Which, naturally, made her think of Ichigo. He was the only person on Earth who knew where these magic rocks came from. And of course, he'd vanished right when she needed him most. What an infuriating puzzle of a guy. He didn't just have his hands on something incredibly rare. He knew exactly how to use it with pinpoint precision. She started to wonder if High School Student was just Chiju's cover story. Speaking of whom, back in the danger zone, Chiju was facing his very persistent dance partner, a super buff, boxer-type zombie. He led with a flashy kick and followed up with a clean slice from his trusty blade. Red stuff went flying everywhere. He'd intentionally used that distinct perfume to lead the big guy on a wild goose chase. His last little scratch had already vanished, all thanks to his quirky superpower. With the borrowed blood now safely in his pocket, he could hopefully skip any more unpleasant zombie, meet, and greets. But the clock was not his friend. Only 10 minutes to go. And then, of course, a migraine from the underworld decided to crash the party. His vision went all fuzzy. His thoughts felt like they were swimming in jelly, and his consciousness started to flicker. Okay. So the side effects were a bit more dramatic than he'd anticipated. It was definitely his healing gig. The more he used it, the more his body threatened to go on strike. It felt like he was smuggling a ticking time bomb in his own torso. Still, Ichu clenched his fists, full of main character energy. He refused to be taken down by his own body. That was just plain embarrassing. Not now. Not ever. He was going to end this drama once and for all. But he also had the nagging suspicion that his earlier noisy entrance had probably invited more zombies to his floor. Another fight would be a terrible, terrible idea. Going full-on ninja was his best bet now. The broadcasting room was just upstairs. He crept through the hall and ducked into another classroom. It was completely empty. Not a single groaner in sight. He let out a massive sigh of relief and sauntered over to the broadcasting gear. Amazingly, the old thing still worked. He fired it up. He'd been the broadcasting club's unpaid intern a few times, so he actually remembered how to fly this thing. Just as he started fiddling with the controls, a faint noise tickled his ears. Something was shuffling closer. He froze. A moment later, a truly hideous figure oozed out of the darkness, a disgustingly bloated zombie, way uglier than any of its colleagues he'd met so far, waddled into the room. Ichu narrowed his eyes at the zombie. Hey, you can't just barge in here. Didn't you see the on-air sign? Ichu's eyes were glued to the creature as he did a lightning-fast mental scan. What he was looking at was a textbook case of the puffy corpse phenomenon. That's the lovely process where decomposition gases get trapped inside a body, causing all the soft bits to swell up like a parade float. The end result was a grotesquely swollen shape, and the zombie before him was a poster child for the condition. This particular model wasn't about brute force. Its attack power was a joke, but its real charm was its instability. Once it inflated to its absolute limit, it would pop without any warning. It'd release a shockwave and a highly concentrated mist of the zombie virus. One little explosion could easily wipe out any survivors nearby. And even worse, the boom would act like a dinner bell for every other undead creature around. This walking gas leak had to be dealt with immediately. Not a second to spare. Ichu spun around and bolted out of the room. His footsteps clattered as the puffy zombie lunged after him. But he was ready for it. With a surprisingly graceful move, he caught it mid-lunge and slammed it to the ground, tossing it away to buy himself a few precious seconds. But it wasn't over. As he gasped for air, he saw more zombies starting to wander over. His earlier commotion must have alerted the entire floor's undead population. There was no time to play relocation specialist with the swollen corpse. He decided he'd just have to restrain it right there. Doing his best to keep the thing from moving, frustration started bubbling up. That first bang had been way too loud. Now, the whole floor was crawling with new, hungry friends. For the moment, he had exactly one option: stall. Just as the tension hit its peak, Shiju burst into a control room, the very same one used for morning announcements. Time was just slipping away. With only 4 minutes left, he scrambled to start the transmission. The whole losing blood thing was also becoming a bit of an issue, and if some souped-up prom king zombie showed up, it would be game over for him. Then suddenly, his spidey sense started tingling. The entire undead student body was closing in on the very room he ducked into. Panic was bubbling up. but he shoved it down and tried to look cool. He couldn't afford to hang out in there for a single second longer. Just a little more time. And then the speaker crackled to life. The school's PA system started blaring. The second the broadcast hit, the approaching zombies turned towards the sound, like it was the ice cream truck. Ichigo let out a huge sigh of relief. He had cut that way too close. The zombies started their slow dance toward the speakers. But the playground path was still looking like a zombie conga line. Without a second thought, he made a mad dash for the staircase, even as more zombies crawled up from floor 3. Totally hypnotized by the broadcast, he saw his window and made a break for it. His grand plan was to sprint full tilt to the safe house, juking zombies left and right. But then, another welcome wagon of zombies approached from Building 1. Okay. So a direct charge was officially a terrible idea. Even if he tried to fight his way through, the clock just wasn't on his side. Realizing this, he pulled a tactical retreat to wait for the perfect, most dramatic moment. It came in a flash, with zero warning. He launched himself down to the floor below. The squishy pop of a bloated zombie exploding perfectly masked the thud of his landing. He quickly rerouted his mental GPS to find the shortest path to the playground, taking a leap of faith from the connecting corridor to the gymnasium. With all the zombies distracted by the earlier pop and the loudspeaker's sick beats, the playground should be a temporary zombie-free zone. And just as his genius brain predicted, the area ahead looked wide open. Even if the zombies found the source of the noise, it'd take them a while to smash the stereo. But then came the absolute worst plot twist. He realized the zombies had already played Music Critic and destroyed the speakers, the very same ones installed at the tippy top of the school building. Still, Ichigo pushed forward and stuck the landing in the playground. But his victory lap was cut short. Right behind him, the zombie fan club started pouring in again. While running for his life, he grimly realized they were bouncing back way too soon. One zombie broke through the line and tackled him hard. And then the rest closed in, surrounding him completely. He was so close. Yet the exit was now totally out of reach. Elsewhere in the lab, Natsume was lost in her thoughts. She had a to-do list a mile long and was super annoyed that Ichigo was ghosting her. She mumbled to herself, going over that little detail about what happens when living things ingest the virus. They turn into zombies. That corpse she saw yesterday was pretty solid proof. She wondered, who in their right mind would willingly drink the zombie juice? Just then, a shadow crept past the lab door, down the dim and spooky corridor. The exact same special zombie that ended Ichigo's run in his previous life was approaching. But in the dark, Natsume couldn't see it clearly. She heard a faint voice ask who she was, completely oblivious to the danger just a few steps away. Amidst all the chaos, the same zombie that had once totally wrecked Ichigo in his past life made a dramatic entrance. It tore through the surrounding horde, taking down every zombie until the ground was littered with their lifeless bodies. The creature's cold eyes locked onto him as it strutted closer, its movements smooth and seriously intimidating. A jolt of fear shot through him as he stumbled backward, his voice cracking in a desperate plea for it to stay away. Before he could do anything else, he felt something weird under his feet. Thorny-looking ropes shot out of the ground, wrapping around his legs and holding him right there. The zombie leaned in close, its icy fingers gently cupping his chin, tilting his head up. Its face contorted into a smirk, and a soft, strangely familiar giggle escaped its lips, making the hair on his neck stand up. Ichigo squirmed, trying to figure out what in the world it was planning. Then, pure, unadulterated panic kicked in. In a wild frenzy, he grabbed Natsume, accidentally tumbling her to the floor and landing right on top of her, demanding to know what was going on. But in that awkward, breathless moment, it hit him. The person pinned beneath him wasn't a zombie at all, it was Natsume. She looked up at him, completely unfazed, and said, "Well, look who finally woke up." Ichigo blinked, his eyes darting around the room as he realized he was back in the lab. How did I get back here? When did this even happen? He stammered. Natsum shoved him off, and the motion sent the potion she was holding flying. Just before the vial shattered on the ground, she snatched it out of the air, clutching it to her chest with a sigh of relief, as if she'd just saved her firstborn. Ichigo, still trying to get his bearings, mumbled, always with the mad science. He offered her a hand up. Hey, sorry about the impromptu wrestling match, he said awkwardly. I seriously didn't know it was you. Can you please tell me what happened last night? Natsum explained it all with a clinical coolness. You just sort of appeared out of thin air. At first, I didn't have a clue who you were. You honestly looked like some kind of damsel in distress, all lost and confused. And then you just face-planted on my floor. It was only when I rushed over that I realized it was you. You were a total mess, covered in scrapes and bruises. And you looked like you'd run a marathon. So, I patched you up. Ichigo questioned her initial impression. It was just for a second, she defended. Look, it was pouring rain last night, and I was running on nothing but coffee fumes after a full day of research. You could have been a supermodel, and I probably would have seen things wrong. But Ichigo shook his head, insisting it wasn't a mistake. What I saw felt way too real to be a dream, he argued. Why would that thing hijack my body and drag me all the way here? Natsum just handed him a data file. Less drama. More data. Read your test results. And right there in the report, it confirmed the zombie virus was chilling in his system. But the crazy part was, his body wasn't fighting it. It seems your body is actually using it to stay alive, she explained. So, I extracted a sample and mixed it with a strain from one of those crystal stones. And that's when something totally wild happened. The two viruses merged like they were long-lost soulmates. So, I injected the new combo back into you. And poof, your wounds started healing. The only catch is, the process completely used up the virus that was inside you. Ichigo listened, his mind racing as the puzzle pieces clicked into place. So, my crazy healing factor. It's all thanks to the zombie virus. Every time I patched myself up in that zone yesterday, my head got foggier until I blacked out. And in the end, that thing just took the driver's seat. Natsum leaned in, her expression turning serious. Okay. My turn for questions. What are you? Exactly. Human 2.0. And where in the world did you get crystal stones that shouldn't even exist on this planet? Ichigo took a deep breath and decided to drop the bomb. I kind of time traveled here, he admitted. I'm from a world 5 years in the future. And that future has already gone down the drain. It's a full-blown apocalypse, with zombies running the show. This, right now, this is just 1 month before it all goes sideways. Natsum stared at him, her mind reeling. She realized that the nightmare she'd witnessed yesterday was about to become the entire world's reality. He confirmed it, explaining that the world was about to get a whole lot crazier, with special zones crawling with zombies popping up everywhere. It was a tough pill to swallow, but he swore he had proof. Then, totally killing the mood, he asked about his clothes. She just pointed to where they were hanging nearby. He figured now probably wasn't the best time to mention his secret inventory. He was silently sizing her up. She seemed totally innocent, but he knew he couldn't afford to repeat the deadly mistakes from his last life. If she ever turned on him, he'd be toast. He quietly took a moment to reflect on his insane luck. Though, he realized he'd only managed to clear a special mission because a zombie had, ironically, helped him out. The moment he opened his inventory, Natsum's eyes lit up like a Christmas tree as she gawked at the loot inside. He showed her the materials he'd snagged from a special zone, explaining that, for complicated reasons, he had early access to all this cool stuff. She whipped out a potion, reminding him they had business to attend to. The highest purity she'd ever hit before was 60%. And even after pulling an all-nighter yesterday, She'd only managed to get to 65. The potion's fiery red color basically screamed that it was a power potion. She admitted she was floored that he'd pushed it to 70% in a single day. Ichigo just watched her, silently acknowledging her crazy genius. Natsume compared the new crystal stone to the one he'd given her before. Noticing a ton of differences, she inspected a few more stones, a curious glint in her eyes, before she suddenly spun around and grilled him about his future. She wanted to know what she was up to 5 years from now and, more importantly, if they had been allies in his previous life. Ichigo's voice got heavy as he dropped the bomb. The Natsume from the future was already dead. They had never even met in that world. She asked how he even knew about her then, and if it was the zombies that had gotten her. He explained he'd only heard stories about her. Whispers of a genius pharmacist. Her death wasn't from zombies, he said, but from her own risky experiments, using herself as the primary test subject. She took the news with a quiet, steely resolve, admitting that sounded exactly like something her future self would do in a pinch. Ichigo quickly promised her he wouldn't let her get into that kind of danger this time around. Her doubt started to fade as she listened. Realizing the crazy story totally matched her personality, she agreed to believe him and promised to support him with everything she had. As the tension finally broke, she suggested they finish up what they started, since their work was far from done. A little while later, Toshiki and Mineta showed up at the lab, each one hauling a ridiculously heavy box of money. Toshiki had no idea a single box of cash could weigh that much. Both he and Mineta were completely exhausted, their clothes drenched in sweat. As they stumbled into the room, they froze solid at the scene in front of them. Ichigo and Natsume were in a very interesting position, with Natsume right on top of him. All she'd been doing was trying to grab a potion from him, but it looked like something else entirely. Mineta's jaw hit the floor, his eyes wide with shock. Meanwhile, Toshiki immediately started apologizing for walking in at such a bad time. Without another word, he grabbed Mineta and dragged him back out the door. After a few awkward moments, the two tiptoed back in. Natsume turned to Ichigo, mortified, assuring him that it was a total accident. Ichigo just brushed off the misunderstanding and asked where the money was. Toshiki explained that he'd bought out everything he could through the usual suppliers, leaving the market completely bare. Turns out, this wasn't even the main event. The rest of the party favors were still on their way. Ikkyu slid a little vial his way, practically batting her eyelashes. "Drink up." Toshiki looked at it like it was a death sentence, his voice trembling as he asked, "What is this stuff?" Ma just gave him that, "Trust me, you big baby" look, promising it would all make sense. With a heavy sigh, Toshiki threw it back, and bam, the stuff hit him like a lightning bolt mixed with 500 energy drinks, so intense he looked like he might vibrate out of his own skin. His eyes started glowing a demonic red as waves of pure, crackling energy just poured off him. Seeing this wild transformation, Natsume shot Ichigo a worried look, remarking, Are you sure he's not supposed to look like he's in agonizing pain?" A little monitor nearby flickered a casual 49%. Ichigo, cool as a cucumber, just assured her, "Nah, he's just rebooting." In his head, though, Chiju was running the numbers. The potion's purity was still at 70%. A cocktail that would make a normal person literally explode. Only someone built like a brick house, a pro athlete like Atano, could even dream of handling a dose like that. Since this was Toshiki's first time sipping the special sauce, his body was just having a little freak out. But he'd level out soon enough. They asked Toshiki how he was feeling. Between ragged breaths, he managed to crack this absolutely insane grin, declaring that he felt like he could punch a hole through the planet. To prove it, he casually hoisted 2 heavy boxes of cash, marveling at how they felt as light as a bag of chips. Mineta's jaw was practically on the floor. Once the light show was over, Toshiki got back to business with some new intel. Apparently, most of the money they'd snagged belonged to Iduin's crew. meaning they'd pretty much tapped that particular piggy bank. Ishu acknowledged the update and told them to put a pin in the whole money-grabbing operation for now. Their top priority now was to rally the troops and get everyone on the same page. He figured the perfect time for a little hostile takeover would be at the boss's upcoming birthday bash. Privately, Ishigu was putting the pieces together. The whole cash flow situation was pretty much what he'd expected. But what really got his gears turning was how the super juice kicked in before that nasty little zombie bug in his system could even react. With a genius like Etsuoko on the job, they could probably tweak the purity until it was safe for any regular Joe. And if Atano's crew could start taking the potions, he could just hand them the keys to the kingdom. That would free him up to focus on the real prize, conquering those special zones. He steeled himself, making a silent promise. Before the world completely went to heck in a handbasket, he was going to squeeze every last dime out of Nozomi. And on that note, we cut to the next scene. We find Ajun in some swanky lounge, where the dim lights were making the polished billiard table gleam with secrets. The place was dead quiet, save for the soft times, clack times of pool balls, and the low hum of hushed conversations. He held his cue stick with an easy, unbothered confidence. Ajuan leaned over the table, lining up a killer shot. As he studied the angles, he casually dropped a little news bomb. So, someone bought all the gold. And I mean times all times of it. The news was startling enough for him to look up at Rick, demanding an answer with just his eyes. Rick didn't have a name, but he knew the job was way too fast, way too clean, and completely off the radar. Which made one thing crystal clear. This wasn't some lone wolf. This was the calculated move of a very organized group. After all, cleaning out the entire gold market in a single day isn't just a shopping spree, it's a power play that even seasoned financiers wouldn't dare to try. Adrian's eyes narrowed with a playful glint. So, spill it. Did some country declare gold the new currency of love? Or is there a less romantic reason for this feeding frenzy? Rick, who was already sweating bullets trying to keep up, stammered that he'd checked everywhere and nope, nothing. The whole mad dash for gold was a complete and utter mystery. But the after-party, he added, was a total circus. The market went wild. Prices skyrocketed. And now, despite all the hype, you couldn't find a single shiny gram of the stuff anywhere. And here's the really weird part, he whispered conspiratorially. It was all done with real, actual gold bars. No boring digital trades. And when he said that, Edwin finally looked up from his pool game. The real thing. Huh, Rick confirmed with a frantic nod. Turns out, we're one of the last romantics with a real treasure chest of the stuff. He then suggested, a little too eagerly, that they should sell. I mean, with everyone this thirsty and the well completely dry, we could basically ask for the moon and a few stars. Besides, things have calmed down for now. Another gold rush seems totally unlikely. Just then, a woman who'd been quietly observing them finally spoke up. Her voice smooth as silk. But her words were sharp. Let's not forget, this isn't just some random stock. We spent years courting this collection, winning over our gold reserves, piece by precious piece. With our clever little market maneuvers and strategic charm. To just dump it all because the price is looking hot for a second, that feels incredibly short-sighted. Don't you think? Rick chuckled, teasing her for being such a worrywart. But she didn't even blink. In a messy situation like this, being careful is a superpower, not a flaw. Until we know who our mystery gold hoarder is and what their game is, we can't just make a reckless move. Our gold needs protecting. It's more than just a piggy bank, it's our leverage, our safety blanket, and our power. Edwin, without a word, leaned over the table and sank his shot. The cue ball moving with effortless grace. Another ball dropped neatly into the corner pocket. One of the other guys, who had yet to make a single successful shot all evening, just stared in a mix of awe and quiet misery before finally breaking the silence with his 2 cents. The whole point of getting the gold was to make a profit. He whined. When it's worth a fortune, you sell. Simple. He quickly added. However, that the final call was obviously up to Edwin. Unfazed, Edwin smoothly changed the topic. He asked Rick for a progress report on their little side hustle. The old district acquisition plan. Rick reported that they were just about ready to pop the champagne on that deal. Our people are already redecorating the place. And we're gently encouraging the last few tenants to move on. We're still chatting. But things are looking peachy. Adrian paused, then turned to Rick with an intensity that made the air crackle. Rick, do you honestly get why we're all in this room? What our actual mission is? Rick stuttered for a moment. Before replying, to get results. No matter what. With another flawless shot, Edwin silently vetoed that answer. That kind of boring. Textbook answer, wasn't it? What they were up to was so much more than that. We were all born into these ridiculously powerful families, with everything imaginable handed to us. But all that privilege came with a lovely set of golden chains. It doesn't matter how hard we work or how smart we are. Everything is still decided by a bunch of old men sitting on their thrones. No matter how much they accomplished, society would just slap a spoiled rich kid label on them. Trust fund babies who'd never worked a day in their lives. And the worst part, it wasn't strangers holding them down. It was their own family. Their parents. Their elders. Standing right in their way. Adrian's frustration was practically steaming off him. He was done waiting. He was fresh out of patience. It was time to shake things up. And he'd do it by force if he had to. Rick, finally catching on to the serious weight behind Adrian's words, quickly promised to have all the old district drama sorted out by the next day. Adrian gave a curt nod of approval. For the time being, the big gold sale was on ice. And with the tension in the room still thick enough to cut with a knife, Adrian turned his attention to the girl. Asking about the mystery boy someone had spotted at the casino last night, she reported that she'd already done a deep dive on his files and background. Nothing particularly scandalous popped up. The kid's name was Ishij Shina. Just your run-of-the-mill high school student with a rather tragic backstory. Both of his parents had passed away in a car crash. And he'd been navigating life solo ever since. He was juggling multiple part-time jobs just to cover rent and school fees. As for why he was hanging out at a casino, well, the gossip from his classmates was that he'd started running with Hatano's crew. Lining up his next pool shot, Adrian coolly asked if that was the whole story. The girl confirmed it was, and waited for her next order. Adrian's response was instant. Ichigo needed to be taken off the board. The boy might be tricky to pin down, but there could be absolutely no loose ends. It had to be a clean sweep. Totally untraceable. The girl responded with quiet, deadly efficiency. She had totally anticipated an order like this, and had already set the wheels in motion. On the other side of town, Ichigo was just enjoying a walk down a quiet street. He stopped at a corner and pulled up his system window. The gold Tana had gathered for him was tucked away safely in his inventory. It wasn't a fortune, but it was just the boost he needed to hit level 15. For the next phase of his expansion, he still needed magic ore, another key material, plus some crystal stones that were crucial for Natsumi's research. As he was taking stock of his loot, he suddenly got that creepy feeling of being watched. A shady-looking guy with a knife and a seriously twisted smile appeared right in front of him. He bragged about being a first-class assassin, finding it hilarious that his target was a high school kid. Business had been slow, apparently, and now he was eager to get his hands dirty for a payday. Turns out, reset scan. Ko had put a bounty on Ichigo's head. The man declared that Ichigo had picked a fight with the wrong crowd. Charging forward like a maniac, the assassin made his move. But Ichigo flipped over him in a single, slick motion and landed right behind him. He grabbed the guy's hair and snatched the knife from his grip, pressing the blade to his lips. Perfectly calm and lethally serious. Ichigo demanded to know who sent him, asking if this little ambush was Nozomi's idea. Absolutely terrified, the guy confessed that it was. Without a second's hesitation, Ichigo clocked him, sending him flying backward. The assassin, now a trembling mess, pleaded for his life. Ichigo, shooting him a death glare, gave him a message to deliver. Now wasn't the right time to settle the score with Nozomi. He told him to go back, wait in line, and to never let him see his face again. The man nodded frantically and bolted. With that minor inconvenience out of the way, Ichigo refocused. It was time to get ready for survival in Level 8. The Special Zone Level 8 activated. Thanks to his Time Leap ability, Ichigo had scored a rare VIP pass to these special zones before the Great Apocalypse even kicked off. Well, this whole being ahead of the curve thing was a real mixed bag, until the world officially went bonkers. He was flying solo through these danger zones, and the difficulty setting was definitely cranking itself up. The smart, sane, and frankly, boring choice would be to just not go into the monster-infested death traps. But hey, with some resources in his pocket and spoilers from his previous playthrough of life, Ahiju could still lap everyone else when things got messy. However, that alone wasn't going to cut it against the big leagues. It was time to roll the dice. No matter how much his personal danger zone wanted to eat him, he was diving in head first. It was the only way to shrink that ridiculously huge gap between him and Nomi. But that particular drama was on the back burner. Right now, his shopping list was full of shady, underworld goodies. If he ever hoped to face Nomi as an equal, he needed the muscle and the money to back it up. And Koyanova's big birthday bash was just 2 days away. That party was going to be the stage for Ichiju's grand, world-rocking plan. But first, he had to go crystal hunting and play mad scientist with some potions. And to keep the special guest of his plan from going wild, he needed a whole lot of zombie juice. For the moment, his monstrous little pet seemed to be playing nice. But you can't exactly trust something that might want to eat your face. All the pieces on the chessboard were moving, every member of his crew sliding into place for the big show that would make or break them. And right in the middle of this hurricane was Ichiju, the guy at the wheel, basically playing puppet master with everyone's destiny. He had to level up. Big time. And just like that, morning snuck in. Down in the lab, Natsum finally cracked a tiny, triumphant smile. Sure, her face was a walking advertisement for sleep, complete with designer bags under her eyes that were definitely not Gucci. But her hands were rock steady as she held up the glowing potion she'd slaved over all night. Manetta, who looked like he'd just been resurrected, blinked at her and mumbled something about what was up. She just waved him over and shoved the vial into his hand, before he could even ask if it was safe to drink. The ding times of the elevator doors cut through the silence. Ichiju strolled in, and without even a good morning, Manetta launched himself at him, throwing a wild haymaker. Ichiju sidestepped it like he was dodging a slow-motion beach ball. But Manetta wasn't done. He came at him again, a little faster this time. But Ichiju was way quicker. In a blur of motion, he'd twisted Manetta around and had him kissing the floor. And scene. The whole fight was over before it even began. Natsum just stood there, her jaw practically on the floor. That was not supposed to happen. She was positive her miracle juice had worked. But even with a chemical boost, Manetta got taken down in one move. And then it hit her. The potion was a booster, not a win button. If the user had all the fighting prowess of a wet noodle, it wasn't going to do much. Still decorating the floor, Manetta grumbled that the potion wasn't the problem. The problem was Ichiju. The guy was just playing on a completely different difficulty setting. Natsum frantically pulled up the data logs. And yep, there it was. The only stat that changed was speed. Doubled it. Sure. But that was it. The potion was basically a liquid espresso shot. And nothing more. Ichiyu, looking completely bored, reminded them that playing with mystery chemicals without his supervision was a spectacularly bad idea. But Manetta shot back that it was all part of the plan. Totally safe and calculated. Ichiju just ignored him and turned his gaze to Natsume, and casually mentioned her hair. She shot him a proud little smirk, explaining that a true scientist needs a fresh look for a fresh day of breakthroughs. He just let that hang in the air for a second before telling her to get back to it. She pouted for a moment. Then her game face was back on, explaining that her latest batch of liquid courage only had about a 10% charm boost. Akiyu didn't flinch. He already knew. With bargain bin ingredients, a 100% success rate was a total fantasy. The social battlefields were getting way more intense. So far, the toughest they'd faced was a level 10 party. To get the primo stuff for a better love potion, they'd have to crash an event rated above level 15. At least Natsume's brewing skills were keeping up with his master plan. But it also meant he needed to kick things into high gear. He assured her it wasn't her fault. Then asked with a charming smile if she could whip up another batch by tonight. She practically melted and agreed on the spot, promising that the recipe was burned into her brain. A new supply of courage juice would be ready before dark. Ikaju gave her a cool, single nod, and then told Mineta to get Toshiki on the line. 2 hours later, Toshiki strolled in. He and Ikaju huddled in a corner, whispering like they were planning a promposal. Meanwhile, back at the potion station, Natsume leaned over to Mineta and asked, "So, has Ishiju always been, you know, this dreamy?" Mineta shook his head, explaining they were old classmates. So he had the full scoop. The Ishiju he remembered was painfully shy, a guy that even he used to pick on. But now, he was cool, confident, and had this magnetic energy. Like a total movie makeover. Just a few days ago, the dude who used to get shoved into lockers was now the guy everyone looked up to. Like the cool older brother you always wanted. Natsume watched him, completely lost in thought. It was obvious he hadn't told a soul about his little time travel secret, which meant no one had a clue about the suave, worldly charm he brought back with him. And since he was basically the new kid all over again, trying to figure out his game plan was impossible. Well, one thing was totally obvious, with all that secret knowledge he was hiding. He wasn't just making things up as he went. Something big was about to go down. Across the room, Ichigo and Toshiki were still in their secret huddle. Ichigo mentioned that tonight was Kanyagawa's huge birthday bash. The perfect stage. His entire fan club would be there. Toshiki asked nervously, "Dude, you're not actually going to crash his party, are you?" Ichigo's gaze was solid steel. "I have to," he said. "It's going down tonight. No matter what. I'm going to steal Kanyagawa's spotlight for good." Toshiki let out a nervous sigh, rubbing his neck. Things have been going great. But Kanyagawa isn't just some random jock. That guy is in a whole different league, he warned, suggesting they maybe take it slow. But Ichigo shut him down flat. "There's no time to pump the brakes. We're going all in tonight. And with Natsume's confidence potions backing us, our chances are actually pretty amazing." Toshiki zipped his lips. He was all in. Ichigo added that Natsume would have the elixirs ready. Toshiki's only job was to make sure his dance crew was big enough for the number of potions they had. Only the guys with the sickest moves were getting an invite. Tonight wasn't just another Friday night. It was the night the whole social ladder was getting flipped upside down. Toshiki had to nail his role as the effortlessly cool crew leader. Ichigo would make his grand entrance later. He had to get ready for his star moment. Miles away, in a ridiculously swanky penthouse, Kanyagawa leaned back, asking his posse if they'd figured out who was behind all the recent drama. One of his lackeys reported, "It's some guy named Toshiki, a total nobody from the lower ranks. Apparently, this wannabe has been winning over cliques left and right these past few days. He even got Onren's crew to switch sides. And it looks like he's aiming even higher." Kanyagawa's voice went icy. "Getting popular isn't a crime. But this Toshiki amateur clearly doesn't get who runs this town. You know how it is. There's always a bigger fish. And there are some lines you just don't cross. And when a branch gets a little too big for its britches, Well, snip snip. As the sun went down, the city lit up. And Kanyago's birthday bash was the only place to be a skyscraper soiree, absolutely crawling with the who's who of who can ruin you. We get a little peek at some big shot threatening his valet with eternal damnation if his precious supercar gets so much as a love tap. Toshiki, our leading man, was watching the whole circus from a distance when Harigori nervously whispered, "So, did Iju stand us up for the prom, or what? He's really ghosting us now," he fretted. Toshiki, cool as a cucumber, just told him to wait a little longer, but even Hariguri was starting to get antsy. The guest list was getting longer by the second, and if they waited too long, they'd be trapped like rats in a very fancy, very deadly maze. Toshiki kept a poker face, but inside his head, he was thinking, "Where are you? Iju, did you forget our very important, potentially lethal date?" He'd insisted that tonight was the night. A real make-or-break kind of deal. So the second things started feeling off, a little voice of doubt started creeping in. Toshiki couldn't help but wonder if Ichigo had set him up. But deep down, he knew that just wasn't their style. If Ichigo really wanted them gone, he would have done it ages ago clean. Simple. No fuss. He wasn't the type for all this dramatic, drawn-out ghosting. The guys around Toshiki started muttering, basically saying, "Hey boss, it's not too late to call an Uber and get the heck out of here." To them, trying to take on a titan like Kanyagawa with their little garage band of a crew was completely bonkers, but Toshiki shut that down with an icy glare. Backing out wasn't an option anymore. They were in way over their heads. Hariguri then stepped up and asked Toshiki for a private chat, and the two slipped into the men's room for a classic heart-to-heart. Inside, Hariguri cut right to the chase, convinced Toshiki was getting greedy, whether it was his own ambition or Ichigo's bad influence. Hariguri wasn't sure, but this whole scheme had officially gone off the rails. Toshiki, however, remained infuriatingly calm, insisting his head was perfectly clear. He wasn't winging it. Every single move was part of the master plan. Hariguri admitted that Iju was a total beast, and following him hadn't been a mistake before. But this was different. Kanyagawa's fortress wasn't some back alley clubhouse. The man's entire army was in there. And the cherry on top, Iju, their superstar, hadn't even bothered to show up yet. They were waltzing right into a trap. To him, the only smart move was to tuck their tails and run. If they went to Kanyagawa, bowed really low, and said they were super-duper sorry, they might just avoid getting turned into a modern art exhibit. But Toshiki's face went thunderous at the thought. After everything they'd done, an apology, Hariguri stood his ground. This isn't about your ego. It's about not dying. If that little gadget you're carrying is really that valuable, then maybe handing it over with a pretty bow is our only get-out-of-jail-free card. He told Toshiki it was time to pick a side. Still, he reminded him that the final call was his. Whatever Toshiki chose, Hariguri would follow. No questions asked. And right on cue, a booming voice echoed over the intercom, announcing that all the esteemed guests had finally arrived. It was time to lock it down and seal the doors. But just as they started to swing shut, Toshiki and his entourage appeared, fashionably and dangerously late. "Hold that door," Toshiki called out, his voice a perfect mix of chill and coiled tension. "This party isn't over yet." Meanwhile, way up high, hidden away like a romantic voyeur, Ichigo was watching the whole soap opera unfold through a fancy spyglass. His eyes narrowed as he studied Toshiki. He was desperately trying to figure out what crazy stunt his partner was about to pull. Down inside the grand hall, a flunky scurried over to Kanyagawa and whispered that Toshiki had crashed the party. The whole vibe in the room shifted instantly as Toshiki strolled in, looking like he owned the place, shrinking the gap between him and the silver fox holding court in the center. Kanyagawa's eyes narrowed, a spark of recognition flaring up. He offered Toshiki a smile so cold it could cause frostbite, obviously not having forgotten their last encounter. "Toshiki, ever the charmer, just flashed a winning grin. He claimed he was just there to crash the party. But Kanyagawa wasn't buying it for a second. His look turned skeptical. Toshiki looked less like a party guest and more like a man on a mission, without so much as a whisper. Kanyagawa's entourage started to close in, giving Toshiki and his crew the most intimidating group hug imaginable. Ready to get a little too friendly. You could cut the romantic tension in the room with a knife. Toshiki lifted his hands in a classic, "Whoa there" tiger gesture, a playful smirk dancing on his lips. He proposed they grab a seat and have a little chat first, hoping to dial down the "I might tear you apart" vibe to a more manageable "let's flirt aggressively." Kanyagawa lounged back in his throne-like chair while a loyal henchman stepped up to light his cigarette. The flame danced for a moment before the tip began to smolder with passion. He took a long, thoughtful drag, a cloud of smoke swirling dramatically around him. His gaze locked onto Toshiki, who was practically vibrating with a very pointed, very personal agenda. A flicker of amusement crossed Kanyagawa's face as he noted the grand gestures Toshiki had been making. In just a handful of days, no less, Toshiki had successfully taken over several of his favorite spots. A bold, almost desperate move. Clearly, this boy wasn't just sending a message, he was sending a full-blown love letter. So, Kanyagawa demanded to know what this was all really about. Toshiki, bold as brass, stepped right up. He dramatically waved away the romantic haze from Kanyagawa's cigarette as he laid it all on the line. No time for playing hard to get. He declared that those little territories were just an appetizer. He wasn't after some meaningless turf. No. He was after the main course, Kanyagawa's throne. Right next to his heart. That was the grand prize. And, the second, the confession tumbled from his lips, Toshiki lunged forward with all the pent-up passion of a soap opera hero. His fist, basically a love note traveling at high speed, sailed toward Kanyagawa. But before it could be delivered, the overprotective bodyguard intercepted the message. Catching it mid-flight, he grabbed Toshiki's hand, holding it a little too tightly. The romantic tension shot through the roof. Kanyagawa just blew out a cool stream of smoke, admitting he always knew Toshiki would stir up some drama, but even he was a little shocked by the sheer audacity of this marriage proposal, by way of brawl. He finally realized he'd completely misjudged the boy's devotion. In a flash, Toshiki executed a slick move, twisting the bodyguard's wrist and sending him to the floor in a surprisingly graceful heap. Without missing a beat, he glanced at his backup dancers and gave the signal it was time for the big number. His crew burst onto the scene, pairing off with Kanyagawa's guys. The simmering tension exploded into an all-out, passionately choreographed rumble. Through all the chaos, Kanyagawa was the picture of composure. He watched Toshiki's every move, giving a mental scorecard for his technique. Okay, so Toshiki had better moves than he'd given him credit for. But it was going to take more than a few fancy steps to win him over. Kanyagawa made it crystal clear if Toshiki thought he could win his affection with brute force alone, he had another thing coming. And right on cue, the bodyguard who'd been taking a brief floor nap sprang back up with astonishing speed. He lunged, cupped Toshiki's face like a lover, and then promptly introduced it to the hardwood floor. But Toshiki wasn't one to be swept off his feet so easily. He quickly countered, wrapping his powerful legs around the bodyguard, locking him in a very compromising position. His grip was unyielding, a lover's embrace that wouldn't let go. The bodyguard's face was a perfect picture of weight. What is happening right now? This kid's raw physical passion was way more than he'd bargained for. Flustered, the bodyguard delivered a "get away from me" shove that sent Toshiki sailing dramatically across the room. Toshiki landed in a heap near a table, coughing delicately, getting back to his feet. The bodyguard coolly shrugged off his blazer. It was time to stop fooling around. Kanyagawa gave him a look, a silent command to start the pre-party entertainment with a bang. The guard nodded, brimming with confidence. Sure. Toshiki's little dance troupe had some rhythm, but there were only a handful of them. The guy was so sure this would be a quickie. Probably had dinner plans. Toshiki, meanwhile, felt his brain buffering. Figures he'd be Kanyanagawa's prized muscle hunk. He thought, this opponent was on a whole other planet. Even with his special confidence juice, Toshiki was barely keeping up with the guy's dance moves. This was nothing like the awkward scuffles he was used to. His backup crew, including poor Harigori, was fumbling just as badly. The power difference was just embarrassing. And once the magic potion wore off, their chances of a happy ending would drop to absolute zero. Still, no time for cold feet. He knew this had to be a rip the band-aid off kind of fight. Dragging it out would just lead to a much messier breakup. The bodyguard finally made his move, charging forward like he was trying to get a last dance. As he got closer, he called out Toshiki's name. It was a pretty aggressive invitation, but Toshiki was a fast reactor, ducking the advance like a bad pickup line. The guy grabbed at air, so Toshiki replied with a solid punch to the jaw. The hit landed, but the bodyguard's face went ice cold, like he'd just been brutally friend-zoned. Fueled by righteous indignation, he drove an elbow right into Toshiki's back. Toshiki let out a totally manly yelp as the blow connected. Then the bodyguard just picked him up like a doll and unceremoniously yeeted him across the room. Toshiki crash-landed near a table again, groaning as if he'd just seen his phone bill. From his comfy new spot on the floor, Toshiki surveyed the scene. His friends were all getting styled on. They just couldn't hang with Kanyanagawa's A-list security team. They were getting outplayed in every single category. The enemy team, on the other hand, was still in perfect, annoyingly handsome formation. The harsh truth hit Toshiki, they weren't even leaving a scratch. His internal odds of survival calculator dropped to 51%. Okay. So now they were at a we're totally screwed level of disadvantage. Doubt started creeping in. Had he made a terrible, horrible, no good, a BST, very bad decision? Maybe he should have listened to Harigori and just said he was sorry instead of starting this whole mess. Perhaps if he just handed over the potion and put on his best puppy dog eyes, they might have let him go. But right as that brilliant thought crossed his mind, Kanyanagawa shouted a new order to his main squeeze. End this relationship. Now. The bodyguard nodded and sauntered toward Toshiki again, his whole vibe shifting to a creepy kind of calm. He called Toshiki by his first name. Even admitting he had talent, there's still a chance, he said. If you just admit you were wrong. He'd even talk to the big boss for him. Put in a good word. Toshiki went quiet for a second, catching his breath. He thought about all the drama he'd been through. Ever since meeting that times man. His life had been one long, chaotic reality show. Every day was a toss-up between living and getting cancelled. But something was different now. The script had been flipped, and he was a whole new character. A slow, cheeky smirk spread across Toshiki's face as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his little bottle of liquid courage. His grip was steady. His voice was clear. He thanked them for their concern. But he was done living a life of ramen noodles and regret. Shaking down kids for pocket money, that was the old him. And she's dead. Now. The tables had turned. Honey, he told them to get on their knees. If they did, he'd let them join his crew. He'd even be a benevolent leader, but the bodyguard just clenched his fist, his eyes narrowing into little slits. He stepped forward to make his final, dramatic declaration. If Toshiki wouldn't bend the knee, then he'd have to die. Toshiki just held up the potion he was already holding. He stared at the bottle, torn between, this is a bad idea, and let's do it. The first shot had definitely worked some magic. With just one little sip, the massive chasm in coolness between him and Kanyanagawa's boy toy had closed up quite a bit. A wicked little thought began to form. If he took one more swig, maybe he could actually win this breakup. The possibility of turning this whole disaster around was just too tempting to resist. His grip tightened. But just as the bodyguard's fist was about to give him a facelift, it just stopped in midair. A surprisingly firm hand had blocked the punch, leaving the attacker completely stunned. And standing there was Ichigo, who turned to Toshiki. He casually apologized for being fashionably late. The bodyguard just stared, his brain buffering. He knew that face. For sure, it was definitely him. But the kind of power rolling off Ichigo was totally unexpected. The kid's arm wouldn't even budge, no matter how much muscle he put into it. It was like pushing against a brick wall. Before the goon could even process this, Ichigo decided to return the favor with a little tap. The guy went flying across the room, landing with a very dramatic thud. Ichigo then turned back to Toshiki. All business. He wagged a finger, warning him not to chug another one of those potions. If you drink two, he said, the side effects are, let's just say, permanently explosive. Your body would totally ghost. Toshiki hesitated, lowering the bottle like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He admitted, all right. Fine. The thought might have crossed my mind for a hot second. I mean, if I drank a second dose, I might actually win this thing. But then a little light bulb went off. Wait. How did you know I was about to drink another one? And then the realization hit him like a cartoon anvil. From the very beginning, this entire mess had been part of Ichigo's master plan. Toshiki's eyes widened. He'd been in the middle of a pop quiz he didn't even know he was taking. He wasn't picked for his brawn or his undying loyalty. He was just a guinea pig, chosen at random to see if he'd run off and give the secret sauce to Kanyanagawa. It was a high-stakes game of whose side are you on? A secret audition for the role of loyal friend. If he had chosen Team Kanyanagawa, he would have been spectacularly, undeniably dead. No two ways about it. But he didn't. He guessed the right answer. He let out a huge sigh of relief, figuring he must have been lucky to stumble into the right choice again. There was zero pride in it. It was just a calm, dodged that bullet moment. But this time, he promised he was done talking the talk and was ready to walk the walk. He wasn't just going to say he was loyal, he was going to prove it. Ichigo gave him an approving nod, appreciating the newfound determination. He told Toshiki he had a soft spot for guys who were quick on the uptake. You know, people who actually learn from their near-death experiences. Then, without skipping a beat, he offered to be his ride or die. He told Toshiki to start giving the orders, like a true big brother. While this little bromance was blooming, Kanyanagawa, who'd been watching the whole scene with a scowl that could curdle milk, spun around to his bodyguard. He demanded, would someone please tell me what is going on? From where he was standing, Ichigo looked like some kid who got lost on his way to class. There was absolutely no reason to be hesitating. The bodyguard confessed that he'd let his guard down. The kid's innocent look had totally thrown him for a loop. He just hadn't expected that kind of power from a pipsqueak. Ichigo's voice rang out, sharp and clear, cutting right through the drama. He shouted Kanyanagawa's name like he was calling him out in the schoolyard. His expression was absolutely ferocious. He swore he was going to end him. Right here and right now. The old man had finally pushed his last button. Kanyanagawa's face turned a shade of furious red. His whole cool, calm, and collected act shattered into a million pieces. Unable to hold back his rage, he screeched an order at his guards, take out every last one of them. Negotiations were officially off the table. This wasn't a game anymore, it was war. And there stood Ichigo, looking totally unbothered by the chaos. His raw power and total composure had everyone's undivided attention. The bodyguards working for Kanyanagawa, who had been busy steamrolling Toshiki's crew, all paused and started exchanging confused looks. They couldn't even pretend not to be shocked. As one of them pointed out, hey, isn't that kid one of Hatano's guys? It looked like he sent Kue flying into next Tuesday, with just one punch. A seed of doubt was planted. How could someone like him just be a regular student? Meanwhile, the goon trying to rough up Harigori was having a grand old time, laughing at the shocked looks all around. He was all like, the party's just getting started. But while he was busy admiring the sound of his own voice, Harry decided to crash it, snatching his arm and introducing his face to the floor. Hard. Over on the other side of the room, the head honcho of Kanyagawa's muscle squad stepped up to the plate. muttering how he never thought he'd be squaring off against a kid, still worried about prom. But Ishigu, cool as a cucumber, shot back that this would also be the day he got his butt handed to him by one. Fueled by rage, the man lunged, screaming something about punks and not underestimating your elders. But Ishigu just casually sidestepped the attack. The bodyguard went for another face grab, but Ishigu just hopped to the other side, dodging it like it was a game of tag once more. The bodyguard was getting seriously steamed. He charged again, throwing punches wildly, totally peeved that Ishigu seemed to only be playing defense. Tiki, watching all of this from the sidelines, couldn't believe his eyes. The man Ishigu was now toying with was someone he himself couldn't even touch. Even after chugging that weird power-up potion, Ishigu's power level was just off the charts. Not far away, Kanyanagawa's ears perked up as he heard his other goons whispering among themselves. They were all buzzing about Hatano, trying to figure out his deal. After watching Ishigu's little dance recital, those wild rumors about Hatano taking over Owain's turf were starting to sound a lot less crazy. I mean, even Kuai, their top dog, was getting worked over by a high schooler. Kanyagawa finally lost it and snapped at them, fuming that they were having a book club meeting instead of being on guard. He barked at them to shut up and watch the show, but his bodyguards were too freaked out to just follow orders, and kept whimpering about their fears. After 40 long years, they'd finally made it to the big leagues, only to get absolutely clowned on by some kid. They figured even if they won now, their street cred was already toast. Their toughest dude couldn't even lay a finger on a single teenager. Kanyagawa, practically steaming from the ears, roared one last order at Kuei. He gave him exactly 1 more minute to wrap this up. Kuei got the message loud and clear. Ishigu, however, was just watching him, totally zen. For all the chaos, Kuei's poker face hadn't slipped once. But Ishigu knew he wasn't invincible. At this point, he was having trouble even tagging the guy. Never mind taking him out in 60 seconds. Kuei threw a monster of a kick, but Ishigu just flowed around it, lifting a leg and sidestepping the attack with the grace of a ballerina. Kuei ground his teeth in frustration. He couldn't budge the kid an inch. Not even a test of pure power was going to work. Then, Ishigu saw his shot and went for it, striking with everything he had. His kick connected perfectly, launching Kuei across the room like a bowling pin. He landed with a sickening thud and just stopped. The other bodyguards could only stare, jaws on the floor. Kuei wasn't getting up from that one. He was out for the count. Kanyagawa's mind just blue-screened, completely unable to process what he'd just seen. Even Kuei, the absolute unit of their organization, had been totally flattened. His brain was spinning. Was it even possible for someone to be stronger than Kuei? The rest of the goon squad just gaped, their brains refusing to accept the reality of the situation. A high school kid had just one-shotted Kuei with a single hit. The pure, unadulterated, what the heck of it all left them completely silent. But Kanyagawa snapped them back to reality with a roar that could shake the building. He ordered every last one of them to pile on, dangling the ultimate prize. Whoever took the kid down would get to be Kuei's successor. Lured by the promotion and feeling brave in a pack, the bodyguards started puffing their chests out again. They figured he was just some kid, an easy target. So, with all the grace of a stampede, they charged Ichigu. But the second they got close, the meet and greet turned out to be brutally brief. Like a one-man welcoming committee, Ichigu gave each of them a personal, axe-shaped goodbye to the throat. Every move was perfectly choreographed. A real artist at work. They didn't even have time to RSVP, no. Watching his crew drop like they were in a bad dance-off, Kanagawa decided to change the music, pulling out his gun and yelling for a timeout. But before he could even point that thing, Hiju, playing Cupid with a very sharp arrow, sent a knife flying straight into Kanyanagawa's chest. He coughed up a bit of a protest, then took a dramatic bow and exited stage left. Permanently. Even as the curtains closed, Kanyagawa's last thought was probably, seriously, a high schooler. The handful of guys still standing looked like they'd just seen a ghost and forgotten how to breathe. Their voices were doing this adorable little quiver. It was a lot to take in. Kanyagawa, the big boss who'd run this neighborhood for decades, had just been canceled by a bunch of guys from the B-list. Toshiki was watching the whole show unfold from the front row, barely believing the season finale himself. Ichigo, our star player, had basically soloed the final boss. Then, Ichigo gave Toshiki the "you're up" nod, passing the mic for the victory speech. Toshiki stepped into the spotlight and yelled to get everyone's undivided attention. He had a few words for the lovely audience. His mind replayed the highlights in less than 1 week. This one kid had dethroned the old fox who'd been sitting on this turf for decades. Ishii had basically taken Toshiki's rulebook and turned it into confetti. So, looking at Kanagawa's recently unemployed fan club, Toshiki addressed them directly. Kanyevo has retired, he announced. And now you see why we were so eager to help him pack. He then reintroduced himself as Hatana Tersaki, and he wasn't shy about his resume, openly admitting his last gig was basically shaking down kids for lunch money. As he finished, a little thought bubble popped up in his head. Chiyu really had kept his promise. With his final words, Toshiki made his new position crystal clear to the survivors. From this moment on, he was their new boss. And scene cut to a sprawling construction site, where the air tasted like dirt and sounded like a heavy metal concert. Workers were scurrying around like ants between scaffolding and giant blenders full of concrete. Everyone was moving with frantic energy, all thanks to the foreman's charming screams cutting through the chaos. He was really motivating them to hustle, his voice tight with that special kind of panic that says, if there's any delay, he'll face some serious consequences from Idwan, the guy running this whole circus. Every clang of metal and thud of hammers was a little reminder of the crushing pressure they were under. But the work rave's rhythm got a record scratch when a group of guys who were definitely not on the payroll decided to wander in. They were strolling with a purpose, which immediately caught the foreman's eye and made him stop yelling at his crew for a second. A little "who the heck are you" look crossed his face as he marched over, demanding to know what business they had there. Oh, no hesitation there. They announced they were with Kanyanagawa's crew, currently under new management by a Mr. Toshiki. Just their vibe screamed, "We're not here to discuss safety regulations." One of them stepped up, giving the foreman his best "I eat nails for breakfast" look, and made a friendly threat, suggesting he should probably just observe quietly and not touch anything. Then his buddy leaned in, all cozy-like, and whispered that he'd like a little private chat. His tone made it super clear this chat wouldn't be about the weather. But our foreman, he wasn't about to be intimidated. He puffed out his chest and used his best "I'm the boss here" voice, ordering anyone not part of the project to kindly get lost. Pronto. He insisted they were on a very tight schedule and couldn't afford any unscheduled shenanigans. The intruders just gave him a smirk that said, "Oh, honey, you think you have a schedule?" Their smug faces practically screaming with overconfidence. To them, our schedule was just a suggestion. They made their real reason for crashing the party crystal clear, demanding an immediate neighborhood fee, as if the symphony of construction and our looming deadlines were just background noise. The scene melts over to Adrian, who was deeply involved in a passionate romance with his paperwork. That is, until Minagawa rushed in, the panic in his voice practically screaming, "We have a problem." He reported that a bit of a kerfuffle had broken out at the financial center construction site this morning. Apparently, a group of uninvited guests had stormed the place, demanding a cover charge, and, in the process, had given every single one of our workers a very aggressive, unscheduled pat-down. A quick background check confirmed the party crashers were none other than Kanyagawa's crew. Adrian's expression went from zero to thundercloud in a split second, a fire lighting up in his eyes as he took in the news. His frustration boiled over as he cursed Kanyagawa's sheer nerve, wondering out loud if the man had finally lost all his marbles. The payments were being handled perfectly. So there was no reason for this drama. Ready to confront this nonsense head-on, he told Minagawa to get Kanyagawa on the phone immediately and demand he explain himself. Minagawa's reply just cranked the tension up to 11. He explained that they'd been trying to get a hold of him all morning, but it seems their lines of communication had been professionally ghosted. Adrian clicked his tongue sharply, his irritation obvious as he muttered about Kanyagawa being a sly old fox. Despite the insult, he gave a direct order to just pay the man, declaring that his one true love, the construction schedule, was way more important than any petty squabbles or posturing. Minagawa hesitated, his voice dropping cautiously as he revealed one more tiny, troubling detail. The troublemakers were asking specifically for Adrian, which meant this whole thing had very little to do with money and everything to do with him, resolute and not about to be fashionably late to his own drama. Adrian stood up and decided they were heading to the site right now. Minagawa, sensing this was a bad date in the making, suggested calling the president for backup. The idea was shot down instantly. Adrian's voice was firm as he said that calling for help with problems this size would mean they'd be stuck at the kids' table forever. If they ever wanted to surpass the big boys, they had to clean up their own messes. The sky, a true drama queen, started pouring rain as Adrian and Minagawa arrived, their teams and bodyguards swarming around them like protective mother hens. The soupy mud and gloomy sky just added to the melodrama. And waiting for them, right in the middle of it all, was the lead goon from Kanyagawa's crew. With a smirk that could curdle milk, he welcomed Adrian, commenting on the size of his entourage. Brought the whole fan club. I see. Adrian cut him off, completely over the small talk. Skip it. What does Kanyagawa want? The goon flicked his cigarette away with a theatrical flair, a grin spreading across his face. Kanyagawa. Oh. He's no longer with the company. That little bombshell sent a jolt through Adrian's bodyguards, who all looked ready to pounce. But Adrian held up a hand, telling them to chill. The goon then gestured grandly to introduce their new boss as Hatano Toshiki stepped out from the shadows. Recognition hit Adrian like a ton of bricks. He knew that face. Toshiki was the kid from Elgane's casino. He quickly put two and two together. This same kid had somehow staged a hostile takeover of Kanyagawa's entire operation in just a few days. It confirmed all of Adrian's suspicions about the mysterious up-and-comer he'd been watching. Still, with his precious construction deadline getting closer, he didn't have time for this. Adrian had zero time for pleasantries and cut right to the chase, asking Toshiki why he was crashing the party if it wasn't about money, a sly smirk playing on his lips. Toshiki casually announced that he was actually there for all of Adrian's lovely gold. The light bulb went on over Adrian's head, his expression souring as he realized this was the infamous gold collector he'd been hearing whispers about. Toshiki confirmed with a nod, admitting that his personal treasure trove was still feeling a little light. Adrian demanded to know what he wanted with all that gold, but Toshiki just waved it off as a hobby before changing the subject to Adrian's career goals. He pointed out how terribly important the construction schedule was for proving Adrian was more than just a name. Toshiki then offered some unsolicited advice, suggesting that if he were in Adrian's expensive shoes, he'd just pay up and focus on his little project. Recognizing the veiled threat, Adrian noted with a hint of sarcasm, My. Someone's certainly done their homework. Toshiki's playful demeanor vanished as he confirmed, This is much more than homework, and there won't be a test. Adrian seahilled, figuring Toshiki already knew his inventory, and tried to talk price. But Toshiki immediately shut that conversation down. He told him flat out to just hand over the gold. No deals. Adrian stared, a mix of disbelief and fury bubbling up inside him. The sheer audacity was infuriating. He couldn't believe some street punk dared to interfere with his business and ordered him to get lost. He dismissed him as gutter trash. But Toshiki's cold reply hit back, pointing out that Adrian wasn't the only one who knew the land's future potential. Toshiki conceded that they couldn't exactly rearrange Adrian's pretty face. However, he explained, tying up the construction project in knots until it bled, Money would be laughably easy for them. Adrian's mind spun as he tried to figure out how Toshiki knew so much. The regional development plan was top secret. It was information known only to a tight circle of insiders. And the fact that this guy knew about it was completely stunning. He was left speechless, wondering who this man could possibly be, which Toshiki clearly enjoyed. Mocking him for being so quiet, Adrian muttered that Toshiki's back-alley tactics were filthy, perfectly suited for the scum of the earth, which clearly struck a nerve. Toshiki demanded he elaborate, prompting Adrian to turn to his men and call Toshiki a savage who only understands violence. He accused him of putting on a cheap suit to play businessman. But with his patience gone, Adrian finally ordered his men to take out the trash. In a flash, the two sides collided, turning the rain-drenched sight into a chaotic brawl as Minagawa charged straight for Toshiki. He threw a heavy punch, but Ichigo intercepted it effortlessly, catching the fist before his other hand clamped around Minagawa's throat. Minagawa, gasping for air, tried to warn Ichigo who he was messing with, only to realize the man's grip was like solid steel. Across the chaos, Toshiki grabbed Adrian by his designer tie, yanking him face to face and admitting, "You're right. I am a savage. But," he declared, "I fought tooth and nail for everything I have. You just lived a life of privilege." He called him a little prince born into a rich family, throwing his father's weight around to feel important. Minagawa swung at Ichigo again, but Ichigo caught his arm and countered with a gut-wrenching punch that sent Minagawa staggering. Minagawa desperately tried to lift Ichigo for a throw, but trying to move the man was like trying to uproot an oak tree. Ichigo easily flipped the script, mounting him and brutally slamming his head into the muddy ground, leaving the onlookers whispering in shock that Minagawa had actually lost. Byuan just stood there, completely gobsmacked, like his brain had hit the pause button. He was just processing how ridiculously outmatched they were. Minawa was taking a dirt nap, and Adrian was uselessly screaming at him to walk it off. It finally dawned on him that screaming wasn't a miracle cure. Minawa was totally checked out. Adrian's inner monologue got real salty. Minawa, "Mr. I know every martial art ever," got folded like a cheap lawn chair. To Adrian's mind, the guy was now as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Ichigo's gaze slid over to Adrian, cold and unimpressed. With Minawa out of the picture, it was Adrian's turn to play. The pressure was on. And let's just say, the odds were not in his favor. Ichigo gave him a look that basically downloaded his entire thought process, especially the part labeled, "Ditch everyone and run for the hills." The accuracy of that glare hit Adrian like a ton of bricks. How could this guy read his flight over fight plan so perfectly? This kid was so annoying it was almost a superpower. Utterly panicked, Adrian switched to his only other skill, trying to buy his way out. He started babbling about offering anything and everything, figuring Toshiki was just in it for the cash. If he'd just play ball, the Adrian family would foot the bill. Toshiki, looking bored, asked for the specifics, and Adrian laid out his one little condition. He wanted Ichigo, gift-wrapped and delivered. You know, the kid who'd been a royal pain in his butt since that whole casino mess. Adrian sweetened the pot, saying that if Toshiki had any personal requests, the Adrian family's checkbook was wide open. Of course, his brain was secretly scheming. If he could just get these two to turn on each other, Ichigo would be so much easier to handle solo. He was sure of it. Nobody could say no to a deal that sweet. Ichigo's face went from bored to utterly disgusted. The sheer audacity of Adrian, thinking his money made him a puppet master, was just gross. Honestly, just hearing the guy's voice was making him nauseous. Adrian's smug composure shattered as pure terror took over. He started to stammer, demanding to know what Ichigo was planning, and then squealing for Toshiki to call off his attack dog before it was too late. And scene. Later. Ichigo and Toshiki were cruising along in the car. Toshiki glanced over, asking, "So, Are we sure leaving Adrian like that was the best move? We get a quick flash of Adrian, looking like he'd been through a blender, courtesy of Ichigo's personal feedback session. Back in the car, Ichigo replied, cool as a cucumber. Oh, he'll live. A quick ending would be way too merciful. I'm more of a, let's make him regret every life choice kind of guy. Just then, a red light brought their romantic getaway car to a stop. Toshiki turned to Ichigo, a skeptical eyebrow raised. You really think he's just going to wire the money? Nufus Ichigo just smirked. Oh, absolutely. That little project of his is his entire world. Toshiki just nodded. Like, you always know just what makes these idiots tick. Changing the subject, Ichigo asked. So, about that other thing. Toshiki knew exactly what he meant. You mean the warehouse? All set. I found a nice, big one out in the middle of nowhere. Just like you wanted. Sending you the coordinates now. He then handed over a card, adding, here's the company credit card. Honey, he insisted Ichigo should be the one to manage their finances. Ichigo casually flipped the card over. So, what's our shopping budget? Toshiki leaned back. Well, the whole pot is about $100 million. But I only put 10 million on that one for now. The rest is a bit tied up. And just like that, Ichigo's mind was already running, planning their next big date. With Destiny. All right. It was officially time to go full-on hoarder mode with the starter pack gear he was rocking. His inventory was still pathetically stuck at level 3 and was crying out for an upgrade. With the crystal stones he'd already managed to snag, he could power level it straight to 10. After that, it was going to take some serious cash, and those fancier intermediate crystal stones, a level 3 inventory the size of a fanny pack, just wasn't going to cut it for the stacks of cash he was collecting. A one-shot jump to level 10 was a must. Level 10 would bless him with a glorious 7 cubic meters of space. Basically his own private, loot-filled phone booth, which was finally big enough to stash a respectable amount of stuff. He wondered if he should go scout the area for some hot zones to grind for more materials. Snapping out of his strategic daydream, Ichigo ordered Toshiki to pull the car over. Toshiki asked where he was off to and if he needed any backup. Ichigo just waved him off, saying he was just going for a little wander and didn't need a chaperone. Toshiki then asked about the organization's boys, and Ichigo basically told him to use his best judgment and play it by ear. Getting Idun's gold back was priority number 1. It had to be the real deal. A physical gold, locked down safe and sound in the warehouse. Kashiki gave a roger that and asked if he should wait around. Ichigo told him, don't call me. I'll call you. Toshiki dropped him off and sped away. Ichigo scanned the street, and his eyes landed on Natsum. Standing a little too close was Corzona from Forensics. The sight instantly irked him. It definitely looked like the two of them had a cozy little meeting planned. A seed of doubt, or maybe something else, began to sprout in his mind as he watched them. Cut to a fancy hospital VIP room, where Yuan and Minawa were recovering. Yuan, now awake, was dramatically cursing the absolute humiliation he'd suffered, calling it the first time in his life he'd ever been so thoroughly owned. One of his lackeys then informed him that their genius plan had been ratted out by Hatano, that same guy from the casino, who was now shaking them down for a boatload of money. Minagawa spoke up, noting that the real problem was that student. His moves were just not normal. Another freaky detail was how the kid seemed to know them so well. He'd even called Minagawa by name. Isaki just shrugged it off, saying it wasn't a big deal for people in her position to be recognized, and basically told Minawa she was being paranoid. Minawa shot him a look, but Adrian actually agreed with his subordinate's worry. From their very first meeting, that student had a major attitude problem with him. More importantly, he knew things about their project that no outsider should have a clue about. Adrian's voice got steely. The crew that had taken over Kanyonoa's turf were proving to be a serious pain in the neck, to keep our construction schedule from falling behind. We'll pay them for now. he said. But there's no reason to panic. This little payout is only temporary. Eventually, we're taking it all back. Iwan vowed to get back their money and their lives, leaving absolutely nothing on the table. End scene. Now, we're in a quiet little cafe where Natsu and Curzona are sitting across from each other. Natsu slid a folder across the table, handing over the files he'd been looking for. She thanked him for going to all the trouble to get them. Curzona let out a smirk, his voice cool as ice. He reminded her, "I never said I was doing this for free. You vanishing for a week without a word dumped a ton of extra work on me. And frankly, it was a huge pain." Natsum lowered her eyes and apologized for the hassle, explaining that there were circumstances. She then informed him that she was putting in her resignation. As long as she could get her research materials back, she was done. She offered up the rest of her salary for them. It was literally all she cared about. But Curzona just waved the idea of money away like it was nothing. He wasn't interested in her cash, just her company. He told her to stick by his side and be a good little girl. And only then would he consider giving back her work. Natsum just froze, looking at him like he'd grown a second head. He just leaned in closer, calling it a mutually beneficial arrangement. He even dangled her dream job as a forensic scientist in front of her. Her voice went ice cold as she shot down his little proposition, telling him to watch his mouth. All she wanted was her research back, and she wasn't about to play his sick games to get it. Curazono's face soured. Fine. If she wasn't going to play along, then she could just forget about it. Natsum's knuckles turned white as she gripped her folder. "This is my work," she reminded him, pointing out he had zero right to just snatch it from her. Curzona actually admitted she had a point, but then smugly asked how she was planning to prove any of it was hers. He dealt with sensitive personal information all the time. If he decided to slap a confidential stamp on her documents, she'd be locked out for good. He made it perfectly clear she stood no chance of winning this fight against him. Her voice cracked with frustration as she demanded to know why he was putting her through all this. Curzona's answer was brutally simple. It would be a real pain if people found out he couldn't even handle one little intern. Did she honestly believe he hired her as his assistant because of her talent? He told her to just shut up and do as she was told, warning her not to let her mother's hard work go to waste. That was it. Natsum absolutely lost it. She launched her tea right in his face, screaming at him to never, ever bring up her mother again. He sputtered that she was an insolent brat, even after he'd been so generous. Then, his hand flew up, ready to slap her. But before it could connect, Ichigo was suddenly there, grabbing Curzona's wrist in a vice grip. Natsum whipped around to face him, stunned, and asked what in the world he was doing here. Ichigo looked completely calm, his face set. He told her he got the picture and to just leave the rest to him. Curzona went rigid as Ichigo's hand tightened like a steel clamp around his wrist, his face contorting in shock at the sheer power coming from some high school kid. For a split second, you could see the disbelief in his eyes before it all clicked. This wasn't just some random punk off the street. It hit him like a ton of bricks. This was the guy. The very reason Natsum had up and quit on him. That realization just made him even angrier. But before he could run his mouth, Natsum's voice sliced through the tension, her own anger flaring as she told him to cut it out with the disgusting, sleazy comments. Ichigo didn't even bother playing Curzona's games. His voice was steady but firm as he shut the whole conversation down, making it crystal clear that he was taking Natsum and leaving. And without missing a beat, he asked what price Curzona was putting on the research she was here to get back. A nasty smirk spread across Curzona's face at that, his whole attitude just oozing condescension. He called him a wannabe hero, some kid playing dress-up without a clue what he was getting into. And then he dropped his price without blinking. 10 million yen. The number left Natsum completely stunned, her breath catching in her throat. Around the cafe, the quiet murmurs of nosy customers instantly blossomed into hushed, gossipy chatter. 10 million yen for one high school kid's drama. It sounded totally insane to everyone, A few of the onlookers started cracking jokes under their breath, muttering that for that kind of money, someone could pay them to break up with their partner any day of the week. Meanwhile, the more cynical onlookers rolled their eyes, absolutely convinced the kid was all talk and didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. Kurtsono, soaking up the drama like a sponge, leaned in with a sneer, telling Ichiyu to scram if he couldn't put his money where his mouth was. He insisted that meddling in things way out of his league was just a waste of everyone's time, then kicked back with an almost comical level of smugness. He was 100% sure Ichiyu would tuck his tail between his legs and run. But nope. Ichiyu didn't even blink. In a voice as cool as cucumber, he simply asked for the account number for the transfer, which made Kurzono let out a nasty little chuckle. Puffed up with arrogance, he figured it was the bluff of the century and told him to go ahead and try, promising that if he actually coughed up the cash, he would get down on his hands and knees and worship the ground he walked on. At that, Natsumi gave Ichiyu's sleeve a worried little tug. She was practically begging him with her eyes to just drop it and go. But the gossip mill around them was just getting warmed up. Several patrons were trading looks, muttering about how kids these days have egos bigger than their bank accounts and are way too competitive. A couple of people actually felt a tiny pang of sympathy for Ichiyu, figuring the poor guy had gotten himself into a mess he couldn't possibly clean up. But most just thought he totally had this humiliation coming to him, and they all stared, dying to see what he'd do next. Ichiyu told Kurzono he could save the knee exercises, because all he wanted was a proper, public apology to Natsumi. He had to acknowledge her with the respect she deserved. The cafe's chatter immediately cranked up a notch, now filled with total awe. Dropping 1 billion yen for the trouble alone was an absolutely insane move, and it screamed that Ichiyu was definitely not your average Joe. The whispers started flying. He had to be the heir to some mega corporation or something. In an instant, their opinion of him did a complete 180. Kurzono's brain was doing backflips, trying to process it all. Since when did Natsumi have a knight in shining armor with a black card? And now, with a whole cafe as an audience, he was being forced to swallow his pride and apologize on the spot. The sheer embarrassment was making his face burn. But Ichiyu's voice cut through his meltdown, sharply reminding him to hurry up and make good on his promise. Backing out now, with this many people watching, would absolutely torpedo his reputation. Cursing up a storm in his head, Kurzono realized he'd been completely outplayed and backed into a corner. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to bow deep, crushing his own pride. In a voice tight with frustration, he addressed her formally as Miss Natsumi and choked out a stiff apology. He grudgingly handed over her research materials, giving up any claim he thought he had. And with that, they were out of there. Ichiyu and Natsumi left the cafe without another word. As they walked, he noticed her tense expression and quietly asked if she was all right. That was apparently the wrong thing to say, because her frustration immediately exploded. She admitted she absolutely hated how that all went down. She demanded to know why he didn't just punch Kurzono out and, more importantly, why on earth he'd just throw away a ridiculous amount of money like that. Those research materials were hers from the very beginning, and the more she replayed the whole scene in her head, the more furious she got. Ichiyu just calmly acknowledged her feelings and told her not to worry about it. He hinted that Kurzono wouldn't be enjoying that little payday for very long. Natsumi's anger fizzled out, replaced by a quiet, sheepish apology. She confessed that she had snuck off to meet Kurzono without telling him, intending only to get her research back. Ichiyu assured her he already knew everything. He had just happened to spot her earlier and decided to follow along, just in case. So, in the end, everything turned out okay. He told her that next time, she should definitely bring Mineta and the crew for backup, especially for wild, unpredictable encounters like this one. She agreed, then shot him a curious glance, asking him what he was even doing in the neighborhood to begin with. Hiju explained that he'd gotten caught in a downpour while working and had ducked into the shopping district to grab a dry set of clothes. Hearing this, Natsum offered to tag along as a way of apologizing for all the trouble, and he accepted. The two of them then strolled into a nearby shopping mall, making a beeline for a pretty high-end clothing store. From a little ways off, a girl spotted them and nudged her friend, whispering, "Hey, isn't that a Chiu, you know?" She couldn't help but wonder what a guy like him was doing in a place this pricey. And then her eyes landed on Natsum. The woman with him was an absolute knockout. Which, of course, got the gossip mill churning. A few whispers suggested he was a sugar baby, but others weren't so sure, especially when they saw Aiju whipping out her card for everything, muttering about the insane price tags. They decided a little stealthy recon was in order. Their curiosity was just too strong to ignore. Meanwhile, across town, Corzono was stewing in his own lonely little pity party. His jaw clenched so tight it could have cracked a walnut as he kept replaying the whole disaster in his head. Getting played by some intern and a high school kid was a major blow to his ego. A wound that just wouldn't stop throbbing. Yet, as he mulled over the 11 million yen chilling in his bank account, he grumbled to himself that maybe it was a silver lining. He figured that little punk had to be loaded, which meant there was more where that came from. And his mind immediately started cooking up a new scheme. But before his evil genius plan could fully bake, the sound of approaching footsteps snapped him out of his vengeful daydream. Toshiki strolled in, flanked by a few of his boys, their presence radiating a "don't mess with us" vibe that was impossible to miss. Toshiki casually but firmly confirmed he had the right guy. Corzono. Still seeing red. Corzono basically told them to get lost, barking that he wasn't in the mood to deal with anyone. Toshiki just ignored him, his voice calm as he laid out exactly why they dropped by. See, they weren't there for a friendly chat or to make a deal. They were there to give Corzono a little lesson on how to properly spend that 11 million yen. And let's just say this lesson wasn't going to be a lecture, it was going to be a very hands-on experience. Yeah. It was pretty obvious things were about to get ugly. Back at the mall, blissfully unaware, Ichigo and Natsum had drifted into a different section, their pace slowing as they neared the glittering jewelry counters, where the glass cases sparkled like crazy under the bright lights. They were lined with delicate accessories that shimmered like captured starlight. Natsum caught her reflection in a mirror near the display, and paused for a second. She tilted her head, fixed a stray strand of hair, and then started picking up a few different items, testing how they looked against her skin. A small, self-assured smile played on her lips as she checked herself out. For her, looking good wasn't a chore, it was just how she operated. Skincare, makeup, a few little luxuries. These weren't just treats. They were necessities. She explained it so calmly, making it clear that she was a woman, and this was just part of the deal. But their peaceful little bubble was popped by the sudden buzz of Ichigu's phone. The screen flashed to life with Hano's name. Requesting a video chat. Ichigo raised an eyebrow, wondering why she was calling out of the blue. She hit accept and whipped the screen around for Natsum to see. On the other side, Hano popped up, his usual poker face replaced with the smug grin of a cat who just swallowed a canary. The camera then, oh so casually, panned over, revealing a lumpy, defeated figure slumped behind him. It was Kurzumono. Though you could barely tell, he was a sad, pathetic shadow of his usual arrogant self, with a face swollen like a prize-winning pumpkin and a pride that was even more bruised. Hano kept it short and sweet. Every single yen from that little transfer was back in their hands. And as a little bonus, all of Kurzumono's secret stashes had been seized as a service fee. A subtle, deeply satisfied smile crept across Natsum's face at the sight. Her expression only softened a fraction as she acknowledged Hano's work, quietly giving him a mental gold star for a job well done. But before they could properly gloat, a voice sliced through the air like nails on a chalkboard. It was that familiar, sickly sweet tone, dripping with a fake surprise that wasn't fooling anyone. Mickey, with her loyal sidekick, was sauntering over. She wore an expression of pure innocence, acting as if the nuclear-level tension between them was just a figment of their imagination. Her steps were light, almost too perfect. She closed the distance with the ease of a seasoned actress, greeting Akiju as if bumping into him was the most delightful coincidence in the world. Her smile was soft and artfully casual. Akiju, however, was not playing along. His gaze was as sharp and welcoming as a shard of ice. It was cold, detached, and held zero warmth as he finally turned to look at her. His voice was completely flat, stripped of even basic courtesy. As he asked, "What do you want?" You could practically feel the temperature in the room plummet. The sheer weight of his disinterest made Mickey's practiced composure crack for a split second. Desperately trying to regain control, she dialed up the doe-eyed victim act, lowering her gaze to look all vulnerable. Her words were carefully crafted, dusted with a hint of melancholy. She claimed she just didn't understand why things were so tense all of a sudden. "If I ever offended you," she cooed, "I'm so sorry. I just want you to treat me like you used to." Her tone dipped. Going for the sympathy vote, she wove in a little note of sadness, clearly expecting a guilt trip to put her back on top. But her little performance completely bombed. Akiju's attention was still locked on his conversation with Natsum. It was as if Mickey's dramatic monologue was happening in another dimension. The dismissive silence was like a vice, crushing her composure, and even though her smile was still plastered on her face, a tiny twitch at the corner gave away the volcano of frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. Her face felt flushed, her cool girl act straining to keep the rage from boiling over at being so blatantly ignored. Her friend, hovering just behind her, leaned in to whisper the obvious. Something about Akiju seems different. The guy who might have once caved to these little games wasn't just unreceptive, he was a fortress. Not even Mickey's signature cutesy charm could make a dent, the friend mumbled. Maybe he's bluffing, but that only seemed to pour fuel on Mickey's fire. A flicker of sheer determination lit up her eyes as she moved in again. She reached out, her fingers curling around Akiju's arm as she shifted into a pose. It was a calculated lean-in, a slight tilt of the shoulder. Her body was angled to snag his attention, whether he liked it or not. Her voice turned to Honey, asking, "What are you looking to buy?" She casually offered to help him choose, her every move screaming with the confidence of someone who always gets her way. This was her signature move, a tactic that had never failed her before. But Akiju's reaction was instant. His hand shot out, pushing hers away with a slow, deliberate movement that spoke volumes more than any words ever could. And when he finally spoke, his voice was sharp and steady, cutting through the air like a knife. He told her to drop the act. His tone was dripping with contempt as one single word left his lips. Sealing the deal? Disgusting. That one word hit her like a ton of bricks, freezing her on the spot. For a moment, it didn't feel real, the sound just echoing in her head as she silently repeated it, completely unable to process that he'd actually said it to her. Her face twisted in disbelief, which quickly morphed into something much sharper, pure rage. Her voice, which had been so sweet just a second ago, there was now pure venom as she spat. That he should be thanking his lucky stars she'd even looked his way. She called him arrogant, sneering that some nobody from the gutter had no business acting so high and mighty. Her gaze slid over to Natsu, and her voice dripped with so much venom it could have melted the floor tiles. She launched into a whole speech about how Ichiu was flat broke, probably having spent his last yen on a soda at the previous shop, all with this sickly sweet smile. She then suggested a total knockout, like Natsu should really ditch the dead weight before he dragged her down with him. She let that nasty comment hang in the air, her smirk widening as she savored the memory of his past failures. She figured if he got mad enough, she had enough dirt on him to absolutely bury him. The thought alone was a delicious power trip, like holding a tiny, imaginary blade to his neck. Meanwhile, the tension in the store was getting thick enough to be a sale item. Employees and cashiers started exchanging those classic uh-oh glances, their whispers buzzing like a faulty refrigerator. The manager, looking completely done with this daytime drama, pointed at a rookie and ordered her to deal with it. The new girl let out a tiny, defeated groan. She muttered under her breath about why this was suddenly her circus and her monkeys. Her senior, completely unfazed, just reminded her it was her first day and called it a perfect chance to make a good impression. She rolled her eyes so hard she nearly saw yesterday. She knew it was less about a good impression and more about being the designated sacrifice for this headache. Still, she plastered on her best. The customer is always right, even when they're a nightmare, smile and approached. Her voice was pure honey as she asked them to keep it down. She pointed out that their little feud was kind of killing the vibe for everyone else. Mickey wasn't having it. Her voice just got sharper as she turned back to Ichiu. Resuming her verbal smackdown without missing a beat, she told him that people like him didn't belong in a place like this. That it wasn't a soup kitchen for broke guys playing pretend. She then demanded he drop what he was holding and get out before he embarrassed himself anymore. Ichiu didn't even blink. Not a single word came out of his mouth as he placed the item back on the shelf. Exactly as she'd ordered. His face a perfect poker mask. The rookie staffer just frowned, chalking them up as another pair of window shoppers who were all talk and no cash. She let out a silent sigh, ready to walk away, until he reached into his pocket. A sleek, black card slid from his hand into hers. His movement was calm, deliberate. His voice was cool, and even as he gave the order, ring everything up. Not just the thing he was holding, but every single item in the entire store, right down to the last box in the stockroom. He was buying it all. With the card. For a moment, the entire store went dead silent. Mickey and her friend just froze solid. Their faces empty. Mouths hanging open as if their brains had just short-circuited. The junior staffer. Her eyes went wide as saucers as she stared at Ichigo. Pretty sure her ears were playing tricks on her. And asked if he was for real. All he gave her was a slow, deliberate nod. The staffer clutched that little plastic card to her chest like it was a winning lottery ticket and her only key to salvation. A cocktail of panic and adrenaline fizzed through her veins as she stammered out a quick excuse, scurrying off to find the manager while telling Ishu to just hang tight. As the staff went into panic mode, Matsume turned to Ishu. Her look a perfect blend of calm curiosity. She asked, "Isn't this, a tad dramatic?" Even for getting back at someone, Ishu's gaze remained fixed as he laid out his master plan. His voice completely level. "This has zero to do with revenge. I'm just diversifying my assets. In my expert opinion, cash is about to become worthless. It's better to turn it into something tangible, like a lifetime supply of lip gloss, while it's still worth something, before that bit of bizarre financial advice could even land." Mickey's shriek cut through the tension. Her whole cool girl act cracked as she screeched. "Have you actually lost your mind? Are you seriously doing all of this just because your precious little feelings got hurt?" Her indignation hung in the air like cheap perfume. Both sharp and desperate, Ishu barely glanced her way, his eyes like chips of ice, and shut her down with a few cold words. "This doesn't concern you. You're not a part of this conversation. Hair friend," now looking like she wanted to be swallowed by the floor, leaned in and whispered frantically to Mickey, "Okay. From the way this is going, I don't think he's bluffing. This guy isn't just putting on a show. He might actually be some kind of super rich heir." She pleaded with Mickey to just stand down and swallow her pride, and apologize before she went down in flames with him. But Mickey just scoffed, the disbelief in her eyes hardening into pure concrete. She wasn't folding yet. She wanted to see the receipts literally, and she wasn't going anywhere until she did. Meanwhile, the junior employee tracked down her superior to explain the absolutely bonkers situation. The manager looked like he'd just swallowed his own tongue. His expression went from total disbelief to 5-alarm panic. Some student, a kid who looked like he could barely afford a pack of gum, wanted to buy the entire store, every single product, right down to the boxes in the back, as if the day wasn't already a circus. Another customer had just tried to buy something, only to be told the item was technically already sold. The manager had to jump in, apologizing and explaining that the store's entire inventory had just been claimed. With that, The staff kicked into overdrive. The manager became a blur, zipping from shelf to shelf and into the back, tallying up the insane request. His movements frantic and focused, while the junior assistant trailed him, furiously scribbling down every single number. The minutes crawled by, every tick of the clock booming in the store that now buzzed with hushed, frantic whispers. Almost 20 minutes later, the junior staffer finally returned, bowing her head as she presented the finalized receipt like a sacred text. The list had it all: cosmetics, ice cream, the entire backroom inventory, every last thing. The total item count hit 30,230 products. After applying a 20% manager's discount, the grand total came to a jaw-dropping 120 million yen. The number landed in the room like an anvil. Mickey and her friend reacted instantly, their shock exploding into full-blown screams that shattered the store's quiet hum of disbelief. But the total was 100% real. Every zero on that receipt was an undeniable fact. Ishij, however, didn't even flinch. He signed the slip with a smooth, casual flick of his wrist, as if he were just autographing a photo. He then handed over an address, instructing them to arrange for the delivery of, well, everything. The staff just stared, their faces a beautiful mix of utter shock and sudden, undeniable adoration, gave a brisk nod, promising the delivery would be sorted within 3 days. And just like that, Mickey's mean girl facade shattered. Her friend, looking like she'd seen a ghost, scurried forward, clutching Mickey's arm and practically bowing to Ichigo, pleading for him to forgive her train wreck of a friend. She insisted Mickey was just having a moment, that there was absolutely no real venom behind her words. Mickey, trying to salvage the situation, plastered on a sugary sweet, pageant smile that wouldn't have fooled a houseplant. Her voice oozed with all the sincerity of a telemarketer as she launched into her apology, claiming she only acted like a total harpy because she was, so into him and totally lost her cool. A classic. Ichigo didn't even bother to look at her. His response was short, sweet, and to the point. He wasn't interested at all. His gaze immediately found Natsume again as he suggested they bounce. Mickey was left standing there, frozen like a deer in the headlights of total social annihilation, utterly humiliated, her face ashen while her fists clenched at her sides. You could hear a pin drop as Ichigo and Natsume strolled towards the exit. The store staff were lined up near the entrance like a royal honor guard, bowing so low they could probably inspect the floor tiles, their voices chiming in perfect unison, thanking him and practically begging for a return visit. Someday, a little while later, the two of them were ambling down the quiet streets, with the glow of neon signs shimmering on the damp pavement. Naturally, Natsume was the one to break the comfortable silence. A playful smirk danced on her lips as she confessed. Going on a completely shameless, over-the-top shopping spree is surprisingly fun. She then mused aloud. Maybe I should start my own doomsday stash. Just in case. Ichigo simply nodded, his expression deadpan. When the world inevitably goes down the toilet, he said gravely, a single loaf of bread will be worth more than a person's life. Natsume just giggled, completely unfazed by his gloom and doom vibe, and suggested, all right, Mr. Sunshine, let's keep this shopping party going. But before the words were even fully out of her mouth, something changed. Ichigo's whole body went completely still. A faint ripple of energy, something only he could perceive, hummed through the air around him. His playful mood vanished, replaced by a steely focus as he turned to face her. His command was sharp and to the point, go home. Now. Natsume blinked, her eyes darting around the perfectly normal-looking street as she asked, What's going on? Ichigo's voice was calm but final as he replied, our shopping trip is over. A level 15 special zone had just popped into existence nearby. a threat completely invisible to anyone but him. For Natsume, the world was the same. But for Ichigo, time itself started to warp, minutes and hours melting into an irrelevant blur. He was already in motion, his blades slicing through hordes of zombies like they were made of wet paper. Every single move was precise, clean, and brutally efficient. A deadly dance he'd perfected over countless battles. He just kept pushing forward, never once hesitating, carving a direct line to the zone's core until the safe house door finally appeared. Honestly, level 15 zones were basically a walk in the park for Ichigo these days. His technique was flawless, sharp, precise, and lethally efficient. He tore through wave after wave of ghouls without even mussing his hair. The second the system chimed that the zone was clear, he strolled into the safe area. The very instant his boots hit the designated ground, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Toshiki. His voice was even, but held a certain gravity as he announced that the gold shipment was in, a full ton of it. Toshiki wanted to know what the game plan was. Ichigo didn't even have to think about it. He told him to just stash it in the warehouse for the time being. A very long shopping list was on its way. Before Toshiki could even say, "Roger that," Ichigo had already ended the call and was firing off a message detailing exactly what to buy and from where. The moment Toroshiki opened that list, his hands basically gave up on life. His phone nearly took a dive. This wasn't some grocery run. This was an order big enough to make it seem like Ichigo was staging a hostile takeover of the city's entire retail sector. But Ichigo had no time for Q&A. The gold transaction was a done deal. Now, it was back to his favorite pastime, crystal farming. As he strolled down an eerily quiet street, his head cocked to the side, the sharp zap of energy pulsed over the horizon. His eyes narrowed. Oh, look. Another zone. He paused for just a second, totally silent, recognizing the new, annoying pattern. These zones were popping up way more often now. This was no longer a coincidence. Maybe those whispers online weren't just conspiracy theories. Maybe the apocalypse was literally sliding into the world's DMs. He didn't spend a single second pondering it. Without missing a beat, he launched himself right back into the grind. He chewed through zone after zone, day in and day out, clearing, collecting, and hunting like he was in a cosmic race against a secret timer. Almost a whole month flew by like that. And then, suddenly, the clock ran out. The countdown was practically at 0. Only a single day was left. Back in the lab, Natsume glanced up from her work, her hands frozen in midair. Her voice was a little quiet, but laced with a "where has that idiot been" kind of concern, as she asked Mineta if he'd seen Ichigo lately. Mineta just shook his head. Nearly half a month had zipped by without so much as a text from the guy. Even Toroshiki had been completely MIA. Natsume's brow furrowed, her mood souring. She hadn't laid eyes on Ichigo since that bonkers shopping trip. If he wasn't just pulling their leg, then tonight was the big finale. Doomsday. So where in the world did he wander off to? And then, as if summoned by her worrying, Ichigo finally graced them with his presence. He strolled into the lab like he hadn't been gone for ages. His expression was so calm and casual. You'd think he just stepped out for a coffee. His voice was steady as he said, "Been a while." Natsume and Mineta just froze. For a solid moment, neither of them had a clue what to say. It really had times been that long. But Ichigo wasn't there to catch up. He just told them, "We're heading out. Get your stuff." Not long after, their car was gliding silently down a deserted road, taking them to some mystery destination. The ride was dead silent, the air thick with unspoken questions. Eventually, the car rolled to a stop in front of a ridiculously massive compound. Toroshiki was already there, waiting by the entrance like a doomsday valet. As they got out, Mineta's eyebrows shot up. Utter confusion colored his voice as he asked, "Toroshiki dude, what are you doing here so early?" Toroshiki, however, totally dodged the question. Instead, his eyes flicked over to Ishigu. He explained he'd been on a multi-city road trip, scooping up every last item on that certifiably insane list. He gestured for them to come along, telling them they had to see it to believe it. The second, the warehouse door creaked open. Both Natsume and Mineta were rooted to the spot. Their eyes went wide, trying to process the scene. It looked like someone had successfully robbed an entire country's worth of supplies, from floor to ceiling. Every square inch was packed with mountains of food and endless stacks of bottled water. An ocean of fuel barrels, crates upon crates of medicine, rows of generators, and so much more. They whipped around to face him, completely stunned, demanding to know what on earth all this was. Taroshiki just tapped on a nearby laptop, casually scrolling through pages of data, and calmly confirmed that every single item on the list was accounted for. It was all there. But Ishigu didn't just nod. He asked again. His tone was all business, demanding a straight answer. Tiki just gave him a look and said, "Oh, sweetie, this isn't even the main course. This is just the appetizer. The rest is chilling in the warehouse next door." To pull this little shopping spree off, he basically convinced 4 of the biggest grocery stores to go minimalist. Matsume and Mineta were just standing there, their brains buffering. This wasn't just being prepared. This was being prepared for this apocalypse. The next one, and the one after that. It looked like the shopping cart of someone who knew the world was about to get a very, very bad Yelp review. Then Toshiki, ever the practical one, piped up. "Okay, but even with all this stuff, how in the world are we supposed to store it all before it goes bad?" Ichigo completely ignored him. Instead, he asked, "Show me the money." Once Tiki pointed to the gold, Ichigo gestured for Natsume and Mineta to tag along. There was a little magic show they were about to witness. For the last few days, Iku had been on an absolute tear, plowing through zones like a caffeine-fueled gamer, leveling up again and again until he hit the big 5-0. Along the way, he'd scooped up more than enough of these shiny crystal stones to boost his inventory to the next level. A respectably 40. Now, it was showtime. He strolled up to the pile of gold. A perfect 1-ton cube of bling just sitting there. Without a moment's hesitation, he held out his hand as the crystals flared to life. A brilliant light washed over the gold. Natsu and Mineta could only watch, dumbfounded, as the whole stack started to slowly dematerialize, shimmering like a mirage before winking out of existence. Mineta's jaw hit the floor with an almost audible thud. Words finally tumbled out of his mouth as he pretty much shrieked. What is going on? Was the gold just, evaporating? But Shiju didn't miss a beat. He just kept feeding his power. Crystal after crystal, like they were power-up pellets. A wave of energy blasted outwards, a force field flickering around him, and a deep, almost godlike voice echoed through the warehouse, announcing, "Transaction complete. Gold consumption finished. Inventory expanded. Current level 40. Capacity 350 cubic meters." Which was, enough room to park 2 full basketball courts. Suddenly, the glowing aura around Ichigo became something they could all see. It wasn't just a light show anymore. It was a real, tangible space. Toshiki just blinked, rebooting his brain, while Mineta was stammering, trying to decide if he was watching a physics lecture or a wizard's duel. Ichigo couldn't be bothered to explain. He just told them, "Keep your eyes peeled." Then he grabbed a random cardboard box nearby, lifted it like it was nothing, and just put it in the glowy field. It disappeared in a blink, like reality had just eaten it for a snack. Mineta flinched back, his voice cracking as he yelled, totally losing his cool. What kind of crazy nonsense is this? But Ishiu was the picture of calm. He looked them dead in the eye and said, "We are officially out of time for freaking out. Whether you believe me or not is, frankly, not my problem." The apocalypse is hitting the big red button tonight. At the stroke of midnight, the party starts. We're talking special zones popping up, zombies crawling out of the woodwork. Society is about to have a major breakdown. And surviving isn't going to be about who has the nicest car anymore. It's going to be about grit, having a plan, and not being an idiot. This, Ichigo explained, gesturing to his personal pocket dimension, is my inventory. Once the world goes nuts, you'll all get the chance to unlock your own. But how useful it is, how big it gets, well, that's on you. And gold is basically the cheat code. It's one of the rarest things you need to level up your space. That's why I had you all playing Gold Rush for the past few weeks. He clapped his hands. So, chop chop, the clock is ticking. We have less than half a day before everything goes completely sideways. That was all the time they had to get ready. Mine was just frozen solid. His brain doing cartwheels. He kept muttering that this couldn't be happening, that their social lives couldn't just implode overnight. But Toshiki knew better than to argue. He'd been friends with Ichigo long enough to know his crazy schemes, no matter how bonkers they sounded, were rarely off the mark. He just slapped a reassuring hand on Mineta's shoulder, telling him to chill out and just roll with it. Ichigo repeated his master plan one more time. Whether they thought he was nuts or not was their problem, but he refused to let his best wingmen walk into this disaster without a fighting chance. That's why he was arming them with enough supplies to survive the first awkward waves of small talk. He told them to grab their gear and make it count. Toshiki dipped his head, clenching a fist with mock seriousness, and then nodded. He said he was all in. A few moments later, Toshiki and Mineta had crammed their share of the party supplies into a giant van. The heavy side door slammed shut with a final, decisive clang. Toshiki gave Ichigo a thumbs up, saying they were ready to roll. Ichigo nodded, ordering them to get back to their own place and finish setting up. But just before they peeled out, Toshiki looked back at him. Their friendship had always been a bit of a roller coaster. But Toshiki admitted that this time, he actually believed in the crazy plan. Ichigo, he was thankful, not just for the heads up, but for trusting them with such a delicate now ridiculous mission. And if he ever needed backup, even if the whole party was crashing and burning, he just had to call. Ichigo cracked a tiny smile and told him to just make sure the snacks survived. The van drove off. Once they were out of sight, Ichigo turned to Natsume, telling her they still had a million things to do. But Natsume wasn't budging. She just stood there, arms crossed, completely silent, with her eyes laser-focused on him. She clearly had a bone to pick. Her voice was low but loaded when she finally asked him why. Why had he kept his secret party planning obsession from her? Did he seriously not trust her? Before she could really get going, Ichigo cut her off. He could already see where this was headed. She wanted to know why he sent Toshiki and Mineta, the very guys who'd been with him through thick and thin, on some wild goose chase. She just nodded, her eyes narrowing. Her next words were heavy with logic, as she pointed out that with all these supplies, wouldn't it be way smarter for all of them to team up before this social apocalypse began? Ichigo just shook his head. Not even a little bit. In the chaos of a party, he told her, desperate singles could be way more dangerous than a bad DJ. He'd seen it with his own eyes. The night always devolves into a savage battle for attention, and when people, especially those who are new to the dating scene, get their hands on too much liquid courage and control of the playlist, it's a recipe for disaster. He needed her to get one thing straight. People aren't born with terrible taste in music, but fear, desperation, and an open bar can corrupt even the purest of souls. He asked her to imagine the kind of cringy pickup lines other people would be using, and how she planned to survive the incoming wave of awkwardness, how she would cope when things got 10 times more embarrassing than they were right now. If she couldn't get on board with his flawless strategy, then this was where their party planning partnership had to end. Natsume didn't say a word. She just spun on her heel and started walking away, each step filled with purpose. Ichigo watched her leave, then called out, You're not even going to hesitate before abandoning my genius plan." But she didn't leave. She stopped and glanced over her shoulder and told him not to sell her short. She had her own ideas, and there was no time to argue about it. She had things to take care of. A few minutes later, outside the warehouse, Ichigo was left standing all alone. The sky above was just a normal, boring, dark sky. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Or maybe that was just my heart. And then, there she was, Natsume, waltzing back like she'd just gone out for milk. She didn't say a word. Just stood there as I gave her my best. "You've got explaining to do, look." My voice was probably a little too dramatic when I said, "So, I take it you've made up your mind." She just gave a single, stoic nod. Classic Natsume, always letting her actions do the talking. I threw my head back, staring at the sky like the star of some tragic play. "Well, darling, we've got 1 minute left," I told her. 1 entire minute to bid adieu to Doc. "Well, everything. Breathe it in," I said. "Because after this, the air's new fragrance will be apocalypse chic. Not exactly a best-selling candle scent. Our lungs were about to get a taste of a city-wide barbecue gone horribly wrong." Meanwhile, all over town, people were desperately trying to squeeze in one last happy hour. You could cut the tension with a butter knife. Everyone was doing their best. This is fine impression. Knocking back drinks and forcing smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. But that big, scary question mark was hanging over everyone's head. Even old Tiki was back at his spot, nursing a cold one. As for whether it would be his last call, nobody had the answer sheet. Natsume was trying so hard to look cool, standing there like a statue. But I could see the panic behind her poker face. But me, Ishigu, I was as cool as a cucumber. I mean, been there, done that. Got the apocalyptic t-shirt. I knew the drill. And right on cue, a sound sliced through the city's nervous chatter. The big countdown finally struck one. Then the system's voice chimed in, sounding as cold and final as a tax audit. A voice that rang out with that special kind of, "your free trial has ended" finality.